I'm going to marry my deceased brother's wife, so we're getting a divorce.
Huh? I stared intently at Kevin's face.
Look at this.
Saying that, Kevin held up his left hand, which now sported a ring I had never seen before. Definitely not our wedding ring,
Sarah gave it to me.
Kevin said, laughing smugly, flaunting it in front of me, as if he had won some competition. But unfortunately for him, I no longer harbored enough affection for Kevin to feel any anger. It's refreshing, I said with a smile, signing the divorce papers fluidly. Kevin watched me in shock. He must have thought I would cling to him crying. Well then, I'll file these for us. I put the pen in my breast pocket and quickly folded the divorce papers, slipping them into my bag. Leaving them with careless Kevin might mean they'd never get submitted, potentially delaying my happiness. I wasn't about to let that happen. I'll go submit this right away. With a firm resolve but a pleasant face, I stood up. Seeing my smile, Kevin nervously spoke up.
Make sure you actually submit those. I have no feelings left for you.
What a blissfully ignorant man. He still thinks I'm hung up on him. A wave of discomfort surged from the bottom of my heart. I assured him with a smile. Don't worry. I feel the same.
Thanks. I'm going to be happy.
That was the last conversation we had as a married couple. Because as soon as I left the cafe, I sprinted to submit the divorce papers as immaturely as fast as I could. My name is Michelle. I'm a 30-year-old office worker. I have been married for 2 years to Kevin, a coworker who is 2 years older than me, and we live with his family. We don't have any children. I wanted to have children as soon as possible, considering my age and career, but Kevin was opposed to it.
Don't you want to enjoy life, just the two of us, for a bit longer? I want to focus on my work for now.
However, unfortunately, his work performance wasn't great. He's too careless. Despite being in sales, he often forgets clients' specific demands and conditions. He frequently misses little confirmations or communications. Because of that, his clients often cut ties after a few transactions, and he never managed long-term contracts. Moreover, fatally, Kevin himself thinks these mistakes are trivial. He's always been the cheerful, likable guy at work, always at the center of everyone's attention. But he's never been valued in performance reviews and remains a regular employee indefinitely. Yet, he believes he deserves much higher recognition. I knew about his dissatisfaction and that there was no prospect of it being resolved. Still, I loved Kevin's flawed nature. The way he'd fall asleep on the living room sofa right away. The way he got too excited during drives and sped up. Maybe it's because I've always lived as an elder sister, but I found Kevin, who was like a younger brother, irresistibly adorable. And there was another woman who doted on Kevin, his mother, Linda. Linda had 2 sons, but her affection was extremely biased towards Kevin, her younger son. It's almost as if she would gladly sacrifice her elder son, Ted, for Kevin's happiness. The reason we've been living with his family ever since we got married is mostly because Linda didn't want to be separated from Kevin. Linda doted on Kevin so much because there was a reason for it. Ted was the son of a previous wife, and Linda was his stepmother. Because of this, Ted's presence in the family home was always somewhat shadowy. Kevin himself seemed to look down on Ted completely. He was always in his room, and it was hard to tell if he was there or not. However, he wasn't gloomy. He went to work normally, ate meals with everyone, and then rested in his room. He didn't watch TV or drink tea with others after meals. And when it was his day off, he would quickly go off on solo trips. He was just an incredibly quiet man. It had always been like this, seldom voicing his opinions or desires, always calmly agreeing with Linda and Kevin's suggestions with a mild, "that's nice." So eventually, both of them stopped listening to Ted's opinions altogether. Even 2 years ago, when I got married, he just calmly expressed his congratulations and never talked or had dinner with me. But he said, "Congratulations." And the amount he gifted was incredibly generous, about 20 times the usual rate.
Wow, nice. Should we upgrade our flight for the honeymoon?
Kevin, oblivious to the generosity of Ted's gift, gleefully upgraded our honeymoon flight to business class. For someone as common as me, the amount was so high, I was completely at a loss about what to return as a gift. In a panic, I consulted Linda, who unhelpfully speculated. Maybe he knows he won't get married himself. Maybe he's living his dreams through Kevin? But ultimately, there was no particular intention behind Ted's actions, and our relationship continued at a comfortably good distance. Day by day, he led a calm life, going out on weekends. It seemed that Ted would just continue to age this way. We all thought so, for no particular reason. However, on a beautifully clear day in spring, we were all shocked. Ted had decided to get married. Both Kevin and Linda had assumed Ted would never marry, so the family home turned upside down with the news. And the partner was.
Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah.
The person who came to the family home to announce the marriage was a tall woman with the fairy-like translucence. She was said to be 30 years old, the same age as me, but looked younger. Dressed in a chiffon dress, with lightly curled hair and elegant yet prominent makeup. She exuded the refinement of a well-bred young lady. Later, Linda told me her father was the president of a renowned pharmaceutical company. Ted would marry into her family and eventually take over the business. That the quiet Ted had planned such a spectacular marriage was beyond belief. To put it crudely, there was no more impressive grand slam than this. Kevin could only stare blankly at Sarah's grace, while Linda, hearing about Sarah's background, was fervently digging for something to criticize, trying to find any dissatisfaction with Sarah to prick at. Linda, unaware that her scheming was written all over her face, persistently asked about Sarah's childhood and student life. Unfortunately for Linda, Sarah was a lady without blemish. From kindergarten through high school, she attended prestigious schools and even went to a state university in Massachusetts. After that, she studied in France and had only recently returned to the U.S.
I don't know much about the U.S., but Ted has always been kind to me.
Sarah said, blushing as she and Ted exchanged smiles. They truly were a well-matched couple. I thought this gentlewoman could surely understand the quiet and mild-mannered Ted. Congratulations. I wish you both happiness. I sincerely wished them well, but
What do you mean, congratulations? Aren't you upset?
as soon as Ted and Sarah left, Kevin, who had gotten upset, confronted me. Upset? About what?
Because Ted snagged such a great woman and is marrying into money.
He is a good man, right?
What? You think he's better than me? How could my brother get such a...
I don't understand many things. Firstly, though it may sound harsh, Kevin doesn't come close to Ted in terms of looks or education. And while I think Sarah is indeed a good woman, I don't understand why that would be upsetting. If he were a good brother, he'd be happy that his brother found a good wife. Just a while ago, he was worrying about, what if Ted stays single? Who will care for him in his old age?
It's not something to be happy about. If I were single, that woman would have definitely fallen for me. Then I could have been the next president.
Right. Kevin would have been more suitable as president.
I was utterly appalled, watching the two in front of me. How could they say such baseless things? Overwhelmed by the absurdity, I took a sip of the tea left in my cup. It had completely cooled, leaving only bitterness in my mouth. As I grimaced at the bitterness, I suddenly became aware of their gaze. It was Kevin and Linda.
If only you were from a better family.
Yeah, maybe I married the wrong person. Maybe I should try to woo Sarah now.
Their cold stares were fixed on me. I looked up at the sky and sighed. If he really wants to be president that badly, Kevin should start his own company rather than chasing after a president's daughter. They must have realized my icy gaze.
Geez, it's just a joke. Don't be so uptight, okay?
Yeah, just a light joke. How about some coffee?
With that, Linda disappeared into the kitchen, and Kevin avoided my gaze, aimlessly flipping through TV channels. I gathered the dishes on the table and took them to the kitchen. Linda was there, boiling water, seemingly waiting for me.
But really, what if Kevin had been single? What do you think would have happened?
This conversation was still going on. Linda seemed to really want Kevin and Sarah to be together, dazzled by the sudden appearance of a president's daughter, unable to discern right from wrong. What do you think? Well, if that were the case, I probably wouldn't have married Kevin in the first place with this kind of talk. Leaving just that comment, I roughly set the dishes in the sink, then dashed up the stairs to my room, grabbed my wallet, and stormed out of the house. Sitting peacefully at the table just wasn't possible in this mood. I'm going to the fast food place near the station and will indulge in whatever I like. I'm going to eat a triple burger today. Let Linda know. As I texted that, Kevin instantly replied, asking me to take out food for them too.
Really? Get us some too. Mom's cooking sucks.
Just seeing his carefree message increased my irritation. He clearly doesn't care about my feelings or my position. He treats me as if I'm an emotionless helper robot. From the window seat, I could see the dimly lit sky and people hurrying home, probably to someone kind waiting for them. While catching this scene from the corner of my eye, I bit into my thick burger with a vengeance. As I ate, the balance between the buns fell apart, and the burger sauce started to drip. Maybe our marriage had similarly lost its balance without us realizing. I wiped the sauce from my fingers with a napkin, lost in thought. Yet, I still love Kevin. I want to spend time with him, to laugh by his side. That's why, despite such insults, I end up buying their share too. They'll probably take it for granted, without a word of thanks. Doubtful I'll even see my money back. Knowing this, I don't have the option to push Kevin away. And so, with a warm bag in hand, I trudged back to my in-laws' house. But the turmoil didn't end there. When Ted safely finished his wedding and moved into his new home with Sarah, Kevin and Linda's envy only intensified. Perhaps the fact that their new home was a high-rise apartment near a station in an urban area irritated their complex. They would imagine Ted's newlywed life with envy and look up similar high-rise apartments online, sighing as they admired them.
Wow, a 38-story building. How nice. You could invite friends over, even have a barbecue.
I had never heard of Linda having friends, and she certainly had never barbecued. I had a lot to say, but I didn't have the energy to indulge Linda's fantasies. By that time, I was daily tormented by Kevin's demands for a divorce, and he did it in a sneaky way. Every day, Kevin would nitpick over minor household mistakes. A small wrinkle left on a shirt, the seasoning of the food. The toilet paper was left with only the tube. The list could go on. Kevin, acting like a child throwing a tantrum, would blow these trivial matters out of proportion.
If things like this keep happening, I can't stay with you. We're getting a divorce.
Typically, the wrinkles on the shirt were his fault for sitting on it on the sofa, and the seasoning of the food was to his taste preference. The toilet paper was an issue while I was away on a business trip for 2 days. He could have just replaced the roll himself. Having all his complaints rebutted like this, Kevin finally seemed to realize that obtaining a divorce on my fault would be difficult. But things didn't stop there. Kevin committed an outrageous act. It happened at the company where Kevin and I work. One afternoon, a shout rang out in the sales department.
I can't do this petty job. I might become a president someday.
Shocked, I looked up. Across the sales floor, a man was standing and yelling. When I realized it was Kevin, I instinctively ran toward the sales department. Kevin stood there defiantly while his colleagues and bosses watched him in stunned silence from a distance. It was as if time had stopped right there. I heard from a colleague that Kevin had, as usual, forgotten a deadline set by a client. Unfortunately, the deadline was for a presentation on which the client had staked their business fortunes, and the pamphlets and novelties our company was supposed to deliver were essential. The presentation ended in a major failure without the materials, and we received a severe complaint from the client. There was even talk of potential legal action for damages, but Kevin refused to admit his mistake.
What? I wasn't told any deadline. It's their fault the presentation failed, isn't it?
However, it was evident from the emails in Kevin's inbox that he had been informed of the deadline, and he received a severe reprimand from his boss. That line was the result. That outburst was probably the result of his fantasies about marrying a president's daughter, Sarah, and becoming president himself. For a man in his 30s, it was embarrassingly childish and shoddy. Embarrassed, he ended up resigning. Kevin must be feeling quite dejected. My main worry was that, however,
If I had married Sarah, I could have been a president. Since I settled for you, you should earn the income.
rather than feeling remorse for being unemployed, Kevin demanded that I make up for the lost income by finding a job, even suggesting that I look at ads for nightclubs or strip clubs. There were certainly things Kevin should be doing before suggesting such drastic measures. Why should I, who have done nothing wrong, have to resort to such side jobs?
Well, if you don't earn money like Sarah, Kevin might leave you.
Even Linda chimed in, teasing gleefully. Well, if Kevin had married someone as charming as Sarah, he might not want to live with you, Linda. Maybe you should start looking for a job now, too. After saying that, I happened to pick up a crumpled job advertisement for a janitor in a nearby building that was in the mailbox and casually dropped it in front of Linda before heading back to my room. In the bedroom, as usual, Kevin's clothes were left discarded just where he'd taken them off. I was about to hang them up, but I stopped. For some reason, I just didn't feel like doing it. In the end, I left Kevin's clothes as they were and went to bed. Kevin was furious when he saw his wrinkled clothes, but seeing that stirred no emotion in me. I may be at my limit. I secretly resolved myself to that possibility. But at that delicate moment, something unexpected happened. Ted had died. It was a sudden illness. Ted suddenly collapsed one day and never regained consciousness, passing away shortly after. It had all happened in just a few days. Even though Sarah had only been married for half a year, she managed the wake and the funeral with stoic fortitude. Tears in her eyes, occasionally shivering as she held back her grief. Those around her struggled to keep from crying too. Yet in this scene of sorrow, two people seemed oddly unaffected by the sadness. The deceased's mother and brother, Linda and Kevin. They looked around and whispered to each other, oblivious to how audible they were to me nearby.
Look at those flowers. I wonder how much they cost. Impressive. Do you think it's okay if we take them home after this is all over?
And what about all this money spent by Ted? Instead of wasting it on the funeral, they should have given it to us.
For Kevin, Ted was his real brother, and for Linda, his stepmother, it was all about the money even though her eldest son had died. I felt so embarrassed. I wished I could sink into the ground. On the other hand,
Sarah still looks beautiful, even when she's crying.
Now's your chance, Kevin. She's vulnerable. Be nice to her, and she'll fall right into your lap.
Are these people even human? They seemed more focused on winning over the widow Sarah than mourning the eternal parting from his brother. Within a week, they were already putting their plans into action.
Sarah's all alone now. I'll go check on her at Ted's house.
Unbelievably, Kevin began to frequently visit the apartment where Ted and Sarah lived. For Kevin and Linda, it was like a paradise.
Just as you'd expect from the daughter of the CEO, she bought the entire 38th floor of that high-rise building. Since Ted and Sarah had no children, we will get something out of it.
But things didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. Just then, Sarah's pregnancy came to light. None of Ted's inheritance would go to Linda. Sarah and the child she was expecting would inherit everything. Upon hearing this, Linda spurred Kevin on even more.
You must marry Sarah at all costs.
But it seems like it's Ted's kid.
What are you talking about? Even if the child is born, if you have a child with her, Sarah's wealth will be ours.
Kevin, now highly motivated, shamelessly pursued Sarah, claiming concern for Sarah's well-being due to her pregnancy. He visited her apartment every single day. If he had that much free time, he should have been looking for a job.
It's tough for Sarah, being pregnant for the first time. I'm just helping out.
Kevin claimed, but I didn't care. If he wants to, he should. There was no way the dignified Sarah would accept Kevin. Ted had not been gone long. That's what I thought. But then, that day came all of a sudden.
Hey, we should get divorced.
Kevin fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, placing it on the table in front of us. It was a divorce paper.
I'm going to marry my deceased brother's wife, so I'm divorcing you.
What? I stared at Kevin's face intently.
Look at this.
He flaunted a ring on his left hand, one I had never seen before. Certainly not our wedding ring.
Sarah gave it to me.
Kevin said, laughing smugly, flaunting it in front of me, as if he had won some competition. But unfortunately for him, I no longer harbored enough affection for Kevin to feel any anger. Sure, that's fine. It's quite refreshing, actually. I smiled cheerily and signed the divorce application, which seemed to shock Kevin. He must have expected me to cling to him, crying, "Well, I'll file it for you." I pocketed the pen and folded the document neatly into my bag. It would be a problem if I left it with the unreliable Kevin, and it ended up not being submitted. With a firm resolve, though my face remained pleasant, I stood up.
Make sure you file it properly. As far as I'm concerned, I have no feelings left for you.
His words, implying I still harbored feelings for him, only increased my discomfort. It was already unpleasant to think we'd been on the same page about this. Don't worry, I feel the same.
Thanks. I'm going to be happy.
My sarcasm didn't register with him, and this exchange ended up being our last conversation as a couple. As soon as I left the cafe, I sprinted to file the divorce papers. I'll never forget the exhilaration I felt then. Freedom. After submitting, I threw my hands up to the blue sky and shouted at the top of my lungs. Passers-by turned around in surprise, but I didn't care. Only then did I realize how much stress I had been under. Economic uncertainty, dignity threatened, unpaid labor, and unprotected privacy. What was supposed to be a new family life with Kevin had felt more like living in a cramped corner of a family owned by Linda and Kevin. Indeed, that house was never truly my place. Without going back to my in-laws' house, I rented a room near my workplace and started a new life commuting from there. Though Linda and Kevin sent several disparaging emails insisting on a proper farewell for the divorce, I ignored them completely. Thinking back, It was truly a blessing that Kevin had quit his job. It spared me the hassle of seeing him at work and, considering his personality, likely prevented numerous conflicts, as the workplace was somewhat sympathetic towards me. Being single again brought an unexpected lightness to my life, and I began receiving offers for domestic and international business trips. No longer needing to prepare meals in advance or bow my head to Linda and Kevin for household chores during my trips was liberating. Everything moved at my pace, and I reveled in this newfound freedom. Then came a turning point. After skillfully managing my business trips, I was thrilled to have my transfer to the place I'd always dreamed of, Alaska. The historic streets of Juneau, countless breathtaking sights, the culinary city of Sitka, and the restaurants in Anchorage. It felt like I was on cloud nine. Since my divorce, it seems like only good things have been happening. I quickly vacated my rental apartment and flew to Alaska. Having a mother from Alaska and returning there every year since I was a child, it felt like a second home to me. I was familiar with the geography, and above all, the food was fantastic. The incredible snow accumulation and the freezing winter air, the crisp, pleasant summers. The town I had long admired and visited many times welcomed me warmly. Here, no one saw me as the infamous lousy employee's ex-wife, nor as the ex-wife abandoned by the brother who chased after his sister-in-law. It was incredibly comfortable. One day, after finishing work, I looked up to see snowflakes in October, an early first snow that would be unthinkable at my in-laws. It had a delicate, ephemeral beauty, but anyone living here knew well that this delicate winter sprite could freeze many lives. I zipped my down jacket up to the collar and hurried home, not to be deceived by the beauty of the snow. A year later, I had safely completed my tenure in Alaska and returned to my original workplace. Despite everything, I think it was a fun year. I got along well with the people at the new location, and we even shared our dreams and life stories. Some became friends who exchanged contact details with me, and there were people with whom I could likely have good relationships. Since marrying Kevin, I had been constantly caught up in housework and my job, always commuting between home and work. It wasn't a burden because I loved Kevin, but this new environment where I didn't have to do anything but work was so comfortable it completely changed my perspective. My time was my own. I liked this town so much that, if possible, I would have stayed forever. No, I think I will definitely return to this town someday. I don't know when that will be. When I returned to my old job after a long holiday, feeling a sense of reluctance, I was surprised. Standing in front of the workplace was
Finally, I found you. Where have you been?
Kevin said as he approached, perhaps because he no longer belonged to this workplace. Unable to enter the workplace premises, Kevin stood at the gate like a lost child, exposed to the curious stares of passersby. Upon spotting me, Kevin's face broke into a relieved, nostalgic smile as he hurried over. I felt an urge to run away. His clothes were quite old, with stains of unknown origin, and he emanated an odd smell. Additionally, most of the buttons were missing, and his clothes were frayed and torn in places. Kevin himself was no better off. His hair was unkempt, his body was filthy, and his eyes, teeth, and much of him appeared yellowed. The teeth visible in his grinning mouth were decayed and chipped. I had been dispatched to a wildfire disaster site through work before, but even after a week without a bath, I had never become that unclean. He was so scruffy and dirty that I wanted to pretend I didn't know him. Those who knew the old Kevin might not recognize him now. It was hard to believe he had once worked here. He looked so out of place at my workplace. Did Kevin realize this incongruence?
I've been looking for you all this time. You forgot to give me your new address, didn't you?
Kevin looked at me with a weary smile. as if he were dealing with a clumsy child. The old me would have blushed and giggled, pleased at being looked at that way by Kevin. But now, surprisingly, I felt nothing.
Since then, I've had a lot to think about.
Taking my silence for consent, Kevin quickly sat down on a nearby curb and, gazing solemnly at the sunset, began to recount his experiences. Apparently, after we parted, Kevin diligently visited Sarah's apartment day and night. In reality, a housekeeper who had looked after Sarah since her childhood was always with her, so they were never alone. But by becoming a conversation partner and confidant for the pregnant Sarah, Kevin gradually got her to open up to him. They even started talking about the future, which delighted Kevin and Linda immensely. They were ecstatic, thinking they could get Ted's inheritance, the pharmaceutical company presidency, and all of Sarah's family's wealth. Brimming with enthusiasm, Kevin was about to greet Sarah's parents.
Gruzy. We jets innen.
What?
That's a greeting in Swiss German, meaning hello, how are you? Yes, Sarah was born and raised in America, but her father was Swiss. After all, her father's pharmaceutical company was located in Switzerland, and Sarah herself had features that reflected her European heritage, and it should have been obvious with a little thought.
What am I supposed to know about that? I didn't know he wasn't American.
He took his anger out on me. Even when Ted had mentioned it during their marriage introduction, it really hit home again how this man never listened to others. By the way, are you aware of the linguistic situation in Switzerland? They use 4 official languages: French, Italian, Romansh, and Swiss German. Apparently, there are also dialects, and it's so complex that even residents of Switzerland consider moving towns due to language issues. Sarah's family was fluent in all these languages and in English, but her father was the only one who couldn't speak English. In Sarah's home, they mainly spoke Swiss German to accommodate her father. So Kevin spent that entire meal sweating profusely, unable to join in the conversation at all. Both Sarah and her mother tried their best to translate, but Kevin just sat there in awkward silence, sweating and quietly eating his meal. Sarah's family must have been quite perplexed. According to Sarah, Ted had effortlessly managed the Swiss language situation and conversed without any trouble. Ted's intelligence never ceased to amaze me. Ultimately, Sarah's parents tried to make conversation topics for Kevin's sake, but they were deeply disappointed with his silent response. If only he had realized his place.
If Ted could do it, so can I.
Kevin decided to try and learn Swiss German. He joined a language school that cost several $1,000s and attended whenever he could. It was one-on-one tutoring that felt like bills were flying away each session. But no matter how good the class is, Kevin's natural fickleness fully emerged, and he only learned greetings before declaring, "What really matters is the heart," and then stopped making any effort. What made things worse for Kevin was the high level of culture in Sarah's family. There was table manners, musical instruments, dancing, wine knowledge, Swiss history, the world economy, and more than anything else Kevin had ever touched. The world they live in is completely different. To keep up with Sarah, Kevin had to make various prior investments, wearing custom-made suits, enjoying orchestra concerts, musicals, and operas. This was how Sarah's family spent their weekends. All these performances required expensive tickets and substantial cultural knowledge to enjoy. Lacking such culture, Kevin gradually began to dread the weekends. That wasn't all. He suddenly bought a large SUV, a luxury car, to pick up and drop off pregnant Sarah. That alone cost $80,000. By this point, Kevin's savings, being unemployed, were exhausted. If he had recognized the difference in their world and turned back then, it would have been better. But Linda spurred him on even further.
Don't give up. You must become worthy of Sarah.
To marry Sarah and Kevin, Linda then started throwing her own money into the cause. I couldn't help but laugh. I remembered Kevin lying sprawled on the worn-out sofa at his parents' house, clad in a sweatsuit. Indeed, trying to educate someone like Kevin was like casting pearls before swine. As far as I knew, his dining manners were terrible. Biting off chunks of food or lifting plates was just the tip of the iceberg. Kevin had never properly held cutlery, always skewering his food on a fork from childhood, and Linda would even eat with her knees up on the chair. I wished Kevin, who would eventually become a father, would use his cutlery properly. But Linda stopped that too.
Let him hold the cutlery however he likes. It's not like there's a law against it.
Table manners truly reveal a person's upbringing. For the first time, I was grateful for my grandmother and mother's strict teaching. Always use it properly so as not to discomfort others. The idea of someone who can't even properly use cutlery gaining international sophistication is laughable. Ultimately, Kevin and Linda never tried to gain any real culture. They just kept pouring money into imitating Sarah's lifestyle. Had they continued this for years or decades, maybe they would have gained some refinement. But before that could happen, they ran out of money. And at the same time, a shocking truth came to light.
My father is retiring soon. He and my mother are planning their second life together.
What?
In a panic, Kevin asked Sarah for details. It turned out her uncle would be taking over the company. Basically, Sarah's father had written Kevin off long ago and had already set plans in motion to hand the company over to his brother. I couldn't help but laugh. The considerations of the elite are indeed different. Moreover, Sarah decided to return to Switzerland, her father's homeland, to have her baby and raise it there.
After all, I'll need to support my uncle eventually and get involved in research and development.
But what about me?
You're free to do as you please.
What about this ring? Weren't we engaged?
Trembling, Kevin thrust the ring Sarah had given him in her face. But her response was absurdly comical.
Oh, that's just a thimble for sewing. I gave it to you because you always wore shirts with missing buttons to remind you to fix them quickly.
I loved you, Sarah. That's why I've always been by your side.
Thank you for your kindness, but it was always unpleasant. Your eating habits are disgusting. You never learn manners no matter how much I teach, and you still can't tell Wagner from Tchaikovsky after all this time.
Sarah chuckled.
I always thought you were stupid. You're nothing like Ted.
At that moment, Kevin made a move as if to grab the heavily pregnant Sarah. However, he was soon seized by Sarah's housekeeper and handed over to the police. A slim, elderly Caucasian woman with a background in lightweight boxing.
You can't even box, and you're American. Maybe you should learn a bit more about your own culture.
The housekeeper sneered as she held him back. After being scolded at the police station and released, Kevin found that Sarah and her family had already left their penthouse and moved out of the country. The old me would have said something like, "Oh dear, that's tough," and comforted Kevin unconditionally. But the words that came out now were icy. Is that so? Kevin looked at me dumbfounded.
You know I don't want to hear that kind of thing.
That's right. Every time he sought comfort like this, I would pat his head and encourage him, hoping to inspire some motivation. But I had no desire to do that anymore. Because, sorry, but don't come here anymore. I'm getting married. Because I already have someone with whom I pledged my future. I had already been proposed to by a man I met in Alaska. I want to grow old with you. He vowed so to me. When I told Kevin, he was furious.
What? Weren't you waiting for me?
His movement to grab me stopped midair, as someone held him firmly.
What are you doing to my fiancé?
It was my fiancé, Tom. Tom was the young ace of the Alaska branch, soon to be promoted to branch manager. Moreover, he was also a rugby player. When Kevin saw Tom's robust physique, all the fervor he had shown towards me seemed to vanish. He wilted and was soon handed over to the police. Given that he had attempted to assault a woman twice, the police didn't overlook his actions, and Kevin ended up spending the night in jail.
Kevin has done nothing wrong.
Linda protested loudly, but was told by a police officer,
Ma'am, your son has done plenty wrong.
after which she dejectedly went home. Having spent almost all her savings dreaming of Kevin and Sarah's marriage, Linda couldn't afford his bail or legal fees. Instead, she demanded something from me.
Go to the police and apologize. Say it was all your fault.
Linda came to me and insisted that I retract my complaint. Despite our relationship, I couldn't back down. I hired a lawyer and filed a complaint against both of them. Consequently, mother and son both ended up in police custody. Probably pleased Linda, as she always wanted to be with Kevin. As for me, I successfully announced my marriage at work, and it looks like I'll be able to move back to Alaska with Tom by the end of the year. Upon sharing this news, I received congratulatory messages and a pair of expensive Swiss-made watches. The sender was Sarah. It turned out she had been consulting me because Kevin was constantly showing up at her place. She found it so bothersome that it could have led to police involvement. Since Kevin was still legally my husband, Sarah was very considerate. However, once I mentioned I planned to divorce, Sarah kept him distracted until I could separate from him safely. I am grateful for her help. Thanks to Sarah, I was able to cleanly sever ties with Kevin and Linda. Now, I look forward to living honestly and turning towards those who genuinely care for me.
Let me introduce you. This is my new wife.
I'd been hospitalized for a long time due to a serious injury. When I got home after being discharged, Brian suddenly said this to me. A new wife? My mind was in turmoil from the unexpected situation.
It means I'm divorcing you and marrying her.
Ryan gently pulled the woman closer to him as he said this. Standing next to Ryan was a young and beautiful woman. Despite her petite and slender figure, her belly seemed a bit protruded.
Notice anything? She's 6 months pregnant. She's carrying my baby.
Ryan happily stroked the lover's belly. My mind was in turmoil from the unexpected situation.
After all, you were just a defective product that couldn't get pregnant.
For someone like me, who had been undergoing infertility treatments for years, those words were like a knife to the heart. 6 months. That was the same period I had been hospitalized due to my accident. Who could have imagined that while I was in the hospital, he would move his lover into our home and even get her pregnant? What a hopeless situation.
Now, sign the divorce papers quickly. We want to be married before this baby is born.
There was no point in saying anything more to these people. I nearly collapsed on the spot, but my mom, who was beside me, supported me. Usually gentle, my mom, who had witnessed everything, glared at Ryan with a stern expression and said in a low voice,
You have no idea what you're doing. You will regret this.
Ryan ignored my mom's words and laughed mockingly with his lover. At this moment, Ryan didn't know that she had connections with some pretty powerful people. My name is Michelle Johnson, 37 years old. I got married at 29 and now support my husband Ryan as a housewife. Ryan is 2 years older than me and works for a company. I met Ryan when I was 26 after I joined an insurance company where he worked. Ryan was a successful insurance salesman and became my mentor when I joined. He taught me a lot about work and society with both kindness and strictness. Ryan, who was so excellent that he was repeatedly awarded within the company, looked very cool to me. It didn't take long for me to fall in love with Ryan. I was young, so I don't remember how much I pursued him. I worked hard to gain Ryan's approval and often invited him to dinner after work. Maybe he finally gave in, as Ryan eventually asked me out. 2 years later, at a restaurant celebrating our anniversary, Ryan finally proposed to me. I was so happy that I cried as I accepted his proposal. I was at the peak of happiness. But then, Ryan set a condition for our marriage.
You know my parents are divorced, right? My mom lives alone now. I promised her that if I got married, we'd live with her. Are you okay with that, Michelle?
Of course, she's your mom. Both of you are important to me. At that time, I was so excited to marry the man of my dreams that I didn't take living with his mom, Helen, too seriously. Soon after, Ryan and I got married, and living with Helen began. Right after our marriage, Ryan and I started planning for our future family. We tried to have a baby as soon as possible, working hard on it. But I didn't get pregnant even after 3 years. Our friends and colleagues who married after us were having children. I was getting anxious about my situation. Why can't I have a baby? Insurance salespeople have a lot of contact with families with children. I started to get scared of meeting customers who looked like happy families. I chose this job because I wanted to protect the happy futures of various people, but I was falling into self-loathing more and more. I couldn't concentrate on my work. This month, too, I wasn't pregnant and I was feeling down, which made Ryan frustrated. Sighing, he said to me in a dismissive tone,
Failed again. You should probably go to a doctor, right?
A doctor?
Yeah, a fertility clinic. They can run tests to find out why you're not getting pregnant.
Then you should come with me, Ryan.
I won't. I'm perfectly healthy. Plus, it's embarrassing. If we're not getting pregnant, it's probably your fault.
No way.
Mom also said she's sad. She can't see her grandchild. Don't make me sad too. So, go to the clinic as soon as possible. Got it?
Ryan spoke to me as if he were giving a lecture. Infertility is not just a woman's problem. It should be a 50-50 issue between men and women. Yet Ryan was convinced it was my fault and forced me to go to the doctor. I was anxious too, and I thought it might be time for tests. But it hurt that he spoke to me like that, even though I was also sad about not having a child. Afterward, I asked him several times to get tested together, but Ryan never listened. Reluctantly, I decided to go for the tests alone. When the results came back after all the tests, I was shocked. The cause of infertility was with me. The doctor gave me a complicated diagnosis. I didn't quite understand the term at first. When I asked for a detailed explanation, it seemed that my body had trouble developing the eggs necessary for pregnancy. The doctor said there was a chance I could get pregnant with treatment, but I was in a daze for a while. I barely remember how I got home from the hospital.
See, it was your fault after all.
Ryan said triumphantly, looking at the test results. Although a cause for my infertility was found, it shouldn't be the sole reason we couldn't conceive. Yet Ryan acted as if it had nothing to do with him.
Well then, good luck with the treatment.
Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder and spoke as if it were someone else's problem. I soon started treatment, but it wasn't easy. I had to adjust to my body's condition and go to the hospital regularly. I would be late for work or take paid leave to continue my treatment. However, my colleagues began to look at me suspiciously. I couldn't stand the scrutiny and decided to prioritize treatment and quit my job. Ryan was concerned about our reduced household income, but I assured him I would handle all the housework, and he agreed. I've been a housewife for 5 years now. During that time, we still didn't have a baby. The cost of infertility treatments kept rising. Ryan complained about taking the money from his income, so I dipped into my savings to cover it. Our efforts to conceive felt more and more like a routine, and we stopped talking about our future. On the contrary, he started staying out late, claiming it was for business meetings. I spent stifling days alone with Helen from morning till night.
8 years of marriage and still not a single grandchild. I must be the only one in this neighborhood without a grandchild. Are you defective? Ryan should have married a younger wife.
I'm sorry, Helen. Helen often made sarcastic remarks to me about not being able to get pregnant. She kept asking when she would see a grandchild, and I could only apologize. I was definitely exhausted, both physically and mentally. One day, while living such a life, things went from bad to worse. I was seriously injured in a car accident and rushed to the hospital. I was waiting at a crosswalk when I was hit by a car that lost control. Luckily, my life was not in danger, but I was suddenly forced into a long-term hospital stay. After my surgery, Ryan and Helen visited me, but instead of showing concern, they complained.
Having an accident at such a busy time, it's just going to cost us a lot of money.
Who's going to do the housework and take care of me? You're such a useless daughter-in-law.
Muttering to themselves, they left the hospital room and never visited me again. Having no other choice, I relied on my own mom. She took care of all my needs and handled all the paperwork. I felt guilty and apologized to her. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm making you take care of me.
What are you talking about? Of course, I'm going to take care of my own daughter when she's in trouble. Don't worry about anything and just rest.
Hearing my mom's words, I almost cried. Lately, no one had been kind to me. Ryan and Helen had been constantly criticizing me, and I kept blaming myself for not being able to get pregnant. This is what a mom is like. I wish I could become a person like her. Touched by my mom's unconditional love, I thought about this. 6 months after being hospitalized, my treatment and rehabilitation were progressing well, and talk of discharge began. In the end, neither Ryan nor Helen visited me even once. Can I really go back to that house and make things work? The thought of life after discharge made my chest tighten.
What's wrong?
Noticing something was off, my mom looked at me with concern. Nothing. But I couldn't fool my own mom.
If you're worried about something, you can tell me, but if you don't want to, that's okay too.
Her kindness made me tear up. I ended up venting to my mom about my relationship with Ryan and our life with Helen before the accident. About how I was the one undergoing fertility treatments. About how I was worried about our finances. About how Ryan had become colder and Helen's constant sarcastic remarks about me. I had kept quiet to avoid worrying my mom, but once I started talking, I couldn't stop. Tears naturally fell from my eyes. My mom quietly held my hand and listened until I finished. Sorry to suddenly dump all this on you. I just didn't want to worry you.
It's okay. You've been going through so much pain.
Honestly, I'm not confident I can get along with Ryan and Helen once I'm discharged. But the reason for our problems is that I can't have children, so I haven't been able to express how I feel. I looked down as I said this. The truth is, I no longer wanted to live with Ryan and Helen. But I felt responsible for our strained relationship, so I couldn't say anything. If only I could have children. But there was nothing more I could do. After a moment of silence, my mom let go of my hand and slowly walked to the window of the hospital room. She started speaking shockingly while looking out at the cloudy sky.
There's something I've never told you. I'm not actually your grandparents' biological child.
What? I was so surprised by this sudden revelation that my tears stopped. My mom's parents, my maternal grandparents, had already passed away. For the first time, I learned that my mom was not the biological child of her parents.
My real parents fought all the time. I was so scared that I always hid in the closet. Eventually, they started pushing my care onto each other, and there were days when they wouldn't come home.
That's exactly neglect. Mom said she was a victim of what we now call neglect. No way. So, Grandpa and Grandma?
They felt sorry for me and took me in as an adopted child. So, I have no blood relation to them.
Why are you telling me this important story now?
Grandpa and Grandma were very close, weren't they? They respected each other as a married couple, and I was happy to be their child. That's when I realized that even if you're related by blood, if a couple can't respect each other, they can make their child unhappy.
Mom turned her gaze from the window back to me and said this as if to make me understand. Her words struck me. A couple that can't respect each other. That was exactly the situation with Ryan and me. For 5 years, I had thought that because I couldn't get pregnant, I was inferior to Ryan. If what my mom said was true, if my relationship with Ryan remained as it was, even if we had a child, we might still be unhappy. I thought about it for a while, then gathered my courage and turned to my mom. Thank you, Mom. I'll talk to Ryan. After I'm discharged, I'll stay at your place for a while, but I plan to return to the house soon.
Okay, I won't oppose your decision, but when you go back to their house, I'll come with you to apologize for the inconvenience. I'll always be on your side.
The conversation ended with my thanks, and we never brought up the topic again. A few days later, my discharge was decided. I sent Ryan a message on my phone about the discharge date, but he didn't reply and didn't show up on the day either. He never visited me until the end. My hopes were dashed, and my long hospital stay finally ended. I went back to my parents' house with my mom, sorted my things, and continued my rehabilitation for about 3 days. Since my dad had already passed away, my mom took care of me just like she did when I was in the hospital. It felt like I was a child again. But I couldn't let myself get too comfortable in the familiar atmosphere of my parents' home. I sent Ryan a message saying I would go home the next day, but it still went unread. The next day, I visited the house where Ryan and Helen lived with my mom. When I was hospitalized, the leaves on the trees were green, but now they had turned red. 6 months was a longer time than I thought, and it was natural for nature to change. Thinking about this, I rang the doorbell. But it wasn't just the leaves that had changed. Yes, a beautiful young woman, neither Ryan nor Helen, came out of the house. For a moment, I wondered if I had the wrong house, but then I saw Ryan come out behind her, and I realized I was at the right place.
Michelle, what are you doing here?
What do you mean? This is supposed to be my home too, but who is she?
Oh, let me introduce you. This is my new wife, Mary.
My mind was in turmoil from the unexpected situation. A new wife. Ryan gently pulled Mary, the woman he called, closer and lovingly stroked her belly. Despite her petite and slender figure, her belly seemed a bit protruded. I looked at Ryan with a shocked expression.
She's 6 months pregnant. She's carrying my baby.
No way.
Ryan, is this the useless wife who couldn't work or have kids you told me about?
Hey, Mary, don't say that, even if it's true.
Ryan and Mary laughed at me mockingly. Then Helen came out from the back and joined the conversation.
So you finally got out of the hospital, but it's too late now. You can't do the housework, take care of me, or give us a grandchild. You're useless. A young wife is much better.
Absolutely. What a hopeless situation.
I was about to collapse on the spot, but my mom supported me.
When I looked at her, she gave me a serious look. I steeled myself and decided to probe Ryan for the unwanted truth. You said 6 months earlier. Does that mean you started cheating as soon as I was hospitalized?
Yeah, she's my colleague from work. She approached me while I was mentoring her. How could any man resist such a beautiful woman?
We've been seeing each other for about a year. It was perfect timing that you got hospitalized. We saw each other every day.
So Ryan had been having an affair with Mary at work and got her pregnant while I was hospitalized. Ryan and Mary spoke without any remorse. Helen was also in agreement with them.
Ryan doesn't need a wife who can't get pregnant. A young woman is better for his future.
That's how it is. I have money, so I'll pay you alimony or whatever. Just sign the divorce papers quickly.
Ryan said this, bringing out prepared divorce papers from inside the house and thrusting them at me. His section was already filled out. What exactly did I come here for today? I thought I wanted to talk about our future. The situation was so absurd that I was dumbfounded. But I realized that nothing would change now.
Come on, sign the divorce papers quickly. We need to submit our marriage papers with Mary. We want to be married before our baby is born.
Michelle, I'd like to ask you too.
As long as I can see my grandchild, I don't care. Hurry up and divorce Ryan.
Pressured by the three of them, I finally made up my mind. With a trembling hand, I took the divorce papers and signed them on the spot, handing them back to Ryan. I'll come to get my things later. Thank you for everything up until now.
Yes. Now we can be a family. Let's be great parents together.
Mary, sorry to keep you waiting. Let's build a happy family together.
Ryan and Mary hugged each other happily. Those were the words I once wanted to hear. Words that I would never hear again. I glanced at the two of them and was about to leave. Then, in a voice I had never heard before, my mom growled at Ryan.
You don't know anything, do you? You will regret this.
Huh? What are you talking about? The only regret I have is marrying Michelle. What can you do? Your bitterness is pathetic.
How dare you call Michelle defective and marry her off to us? You're not involved anymore, so get out of here.
Fine. We'll leave now. Goodbye.
Ignoring the insults from Ryan and Helen, my mom pulled me out of the house. My normally gentle mom had rarely shown such a stern expression, even looking back to my childhood. I was surprised to see this rare side of her and let her lead me out. A few days later, my divorce from Ryan was finalized. It was Ryan who filed for divorce. He even took a photo of the acceptance receipt and sent it to me as a message on my phone. Thus ended my 8-year marriage. A month after our divorce, while relaxing at my parents' house with my mom, my phone suddenly rang. The screen showed Ryan's name. Wondering what it was about, I answered the call.
Hey, what the hell have you done? Get over here right now.
The moment I answered, Ryan yelled at me. His voice was filled with both anger and panic. The call ended after those words. I told my mom what happened, and she suggested we go to Ryan's house together. To ensure nothing went wrong, I contacted the lawyer who helped with the divorce, and fortunately, he agreed to accompany us. The three of us, my mom, the lawyer, and I, visited my former in-laws' house for the first time in a month. When the door opened after I rang the intercom, Ryan immediately grabbed me.
Hey, explain this. You've ruined our lives.
Just when my grandchild is about to be born, what's going on?
Helena appeared behind Ryan, yelling at me as well. Ryan's new wife, Mary, glared at me, holding her big belly. When I asked what was going on, Ryan, irritated, began to explain.
Our affair got out and spread throughout the company and even on social media. Customers have been calling the company with complaints, and my clients want to cancel their insurance contracts.
Ryan has been demoted to a low-paying department. I got fired from the company. How are we supposed to manage without money when the baby is coming?
Why did this blow up so much? You must have done something.
Ryan and the others explained the situation furiously. I was surprised that so much had happened in less than a month. My mom and I exchanged a knowing smile. I wondered if the three of them would be even more shocked when they heard the truth. Imagining their reactions, I looked forward to the upcoming events. This was the beginning of my revenge. I didn't do much. I just made a phone call.
A call? To who?
To your company's chairman, Mason.
Mason?
Ryan was stunned to hear the unexpected name. No wonder, the chairman rarely appears at the company, and regular employees never have the chance to meet him. Moreover, only executives would know his contact details.
Don't lie. How could you contact Mason?
Do you know the chairman's name?
What? The chairman's name?
It's Mason White, right? I remember from the induction ceremony.
That's right, Mason White. He's my biological brother.
What?
Really?
No way.
Ryan, Helen, and Mary were stunned, unable to believe it. It seemed their brains were refusing to process the shocking revelation from my mom. Yes, the truth was that the chairman of the company where Ryan and Mary and I used to work was my mom's biological brother. In other words, my blood-related uncle. My mom's biological parents had another child. When my mom was adopted, that child was taken in by the White family, who had run an insurance company for generations. That was Mason. I only found out about this a month ago. When my mom revealed this to me, I probably had the same expression as these three did now.
My adoptive parents said they wanted to take in my brother too, but since the White family were distant relatives, the connection wouldn't be completely severed. I asked them to take my brother to a well-off family.
You've got to be kidding. Michelle never mentioned anything like this.
It's all true. You never expected me to have any connection with the chairman, did you? I used that connection to inform him of your affair.
What? You told Mason?
There were rumors about inappropriate behavior in the conference room late at night and misuse of company expenses. When I informed him of your affair, He said he'd make a comprehensive judgment based on your past conduct. And as a result, you received this punishment, didn't you?
Just so you know, I wasn't the one who spread it on social media. Someone in the company who loves gossip probably leaked it to an influencer.
No way.
The faces of Ryan, Helen, and Mary turned pale as they realized my connection to the chairman. Ryan and Mary looked absolutely devastated. Ignoring them, my mom approached Mary and whispered words that froze everyone in place.
By the way, my brother mentioned that a few company executives and managers will be dealt with next. The reason is infidelity. It was discovered in an internal audit that they all had relations with the same woman. Who could that be, I wonder?
Is that
What? Is it you, Mary?
Mom didn't respond to Ryan, but smiled and stepped away from Mary. Her smile was as good as saying yes. Seeing this, Ryan and Helen grabbed Mary, half crazed.
Mary, you had relations with others besides me? Answer me.
And the baby you're carrying is really Ryan's, right? You know what'll happen if it isn't, right?
the truth is, I don't know whose baby it is. But Ryan, you said it yourself. Michelle is defective and can't get pregnant, and the fact that I'm having a baby makes you happy. So this baby must be yours.
Are you crazy? We're getting a DNA test right now. If it's not mine, we're divorcing immediately. I won't be fooled by a woman like you.
No.
Enough of this nonsense. Ryan, what kind of woman did you bring here?
The newly formed family was now in a fierce argument, hurling insults at each other. I watched as they quickly fell from heaven to hell. There was no point in staying any longer. I signaled my mom, and we turned to leave, reaching for the front door. But a hand grabbed my shoulder, stopping me. Ryan shouted.
Wait, Michelle.
The grip on my shoulder hurt, and I winced, but the lawyer who had come with us brushed his hand away. Ryan, seemingly out of his mind, started saying something ridiculous. Mary was crying with her face in her hands.
Michelle, let's start over. We've both worked hard. I'm sure you can get pregnant. Don't abandon a pitiful man like me who was fooled by a lying woman.
Honestly, this young girl is pregnant, but can't do housework or take care of me properly. I'm fed up. You were much better at her. I'll forgive you if you come back now.
Ryan and Helen's attitudes were beyond belief, and their excuses were even more astonishing. Finally, I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer. Shut up. Do you remember the horrible things you said to me about pregnancy? How can you expect me to be family with you again? I don't care what happens to you anymore.
Michelle,
I was going to forego alimony for the sake of the baby, but not anymore. I'm demanding alimony from both Ryan and Mary. Can I do that?
Yes, absolutely.
The lawyer beside me confirmed immediately. Ryan panicked and started pleading.
wait. If we remarry, there's no need for alimony, right? Please reconsider, Michelle.
What are you talking about? How could you even think about remarriage in this situation? Are you insane?
I've heard the entire story, and there's nothing favorable for Ryan here. You can't avoid paying alimony.
By the way, Mason left a message. Ryan wasn't fired to ensure Michelle gets her dues. He wanted to make sure she wasn't left in a difficult position. And he said that you're a disgrace to the company, so you'll be stuck doing menial jobs. If you refuse to pay the alimony, you know what'll happen.
We bombarded Ryan with our words. Finally, he collapsed to his knees, stunned. Helen made incoherent noises, and Mary continued to cry. It was a scene from hell. Ignoring their plight, we left. It's been 3 years since then. I'm still living with my mom in my childhood home. Life is simple and peaceful.
By the way, the lawyer mentioned something.
My mom suddenly recalled as we were having breakfast, like always. Listening to her, I felt a bit conflicted. 3 years ago, Mary was dragged to the hospital by Helen for a DNA test on her baby. The test results showed that the baby wasn't Ryan's. Enraged by this, Ryan and Helen kicked Mary out before the baby was born. Mary had no choice but to rely on the real father of her child. However, he had a family of his own and didn't acknowledge the baby. Mary ended up moving from place to place. Even after the baby was born, her unstable lifestyle continued until she could no longer take care of the child. Eventually, the baby was placed in a foster home. Children born to parents who can't respect each other end up unhappy. I remembered those words my mom once said. I felt sympathy for Mary's child, whom I'd never met. As for Ryan, he still works at the same company, but feels out of place as colleagues gossip about him. My uncle told me that Ryan spends his days working silently in a dim room to pay the alimony. After my mom finished talking, a brief silence filled the room. The fresh morning breeze blowing through the window cleared the heavy atmosphere.
Michelle, don't you have a meeting this morning? Are you on time?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I have to go now. I grabbed my bag and hurried out of the house. Through my uncle's introduction, I've been working at a new company related to insurance for the past 2 years. My previous skills and qualifications are useful in this job. Although my colleagues expect a lot from me, I'm doing my best every day to meet their expectations. I couldn't have children, but now I'm not fixated on that and am living life true to myself. Shaking off the memories of those stifling 8 years, I ran towards my workplace.
Go against me, and we'll get a divorce, you parasite.
Silence filled the room. Sean looked up at the ceiling as if to say, "It's over." And as for me,
Hey, why are you laughing? That's creepy.
oh really? Did I look like I was laughing? For some reason, I had a smile on my face. I could feel it myself. My cheeks were twitching, and I knew exactly what kind of intense emotion was lurking behind that smile. Without saying a word, I stood up and handed Greg the paper I had hidden on the shelf. No, I let it flutter down from above his head. The moment it caught his eye, Greg's face changed color.
Hey, this.
Yeah, let's go ahead and divorce. I've already moved into a $1 million mansion. At that moment, Greg's face looked like he'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Slowly, he repeated the word I had just said.
$1 million?
My name is Kate Johnson. I'm 57 years old, a housewife. I married Greg when I was 25, and 2 years later, at 27, I gave birth to our son, Sean. So Greg and I have been together for over 30 years now. Our only son, Sean, is happily married to a lovely woman named Samantha. I don't know much about Samantha's parents. Greg came up with all kinds of excuses not to meet them.
What's the point of meeting his spouse's parents? That's so old-fashioned nowadays.
Apparently, Samantha's father is the CEO of a company, and Greg, being just an employee, must have felt inferior, which is why he stubbornly refused to meet him. Sean got married at the same age I did, at 25. He and Samantha have now been married for 5 years. During that time, Samantha's mother passed away. Her funeral was held for family only, as per their wishes. Sean attended, and I prayed for Samantha's mother from afar. Though Sean and Samantha have only been married for 5 years, they already have 5 children. Their eldest are boy-girl twins, born at the same time they got married, so they're now 5 years old. Next is their daughter, who's 4, then their second son, who's 2, and recently they had their third son, just a newborn. It's rare to see a couple with so many children these days. As for me, my grandchildren mean the world to me, and each time I heard news of a new birth, I was overjoyed. But Greg, acting as if it were someone else's business, only ever said, "Oh, is that so?" Now, one day.
We're looking forward to staying with you.
Wait, what? Suddenly, Sean's entire family showed up at our house. But Sean isn't the type to drop by unannounced like this. Samantha even brought a gift, which made it clear. Greg must have done something behind my back. Suppressing the urge to sigh, I invited the 7 of them inside. Our house isn't very big. We built it when I was 40, and we're still paying off the mortgage. We designed it with our retirement in mind, so there aren't many rooms. For now, I decided to let Sean and his family use the 2 rooms upstairs. Samantha seemed worried. She must have noticed the serious look on my face and sensed something was wrong. I quickly put her at ease. "Samantha, I love having you and your kids here, so of course you're welcome. It's just that I wasn't told anything about this. You guys didn't do anything wrong, so make yourselves at home for now. I'll bring some snacks up for the kids in a bit." Samantha hesitantly thanked me. I stayed downstairs and approached Sean, who looked uncomfortable. "Your dad told you to come, didn't he?" Before Sean could answer, Greg, lying on the sofa with a drink, chimed in.
Yeah, I invited them. I told Sean you were feeling lonely and that we should all live together. You know, Samantha's on maternity leave, so money's tight. And now with her mom gone, I figured they could lean on you.
Well, that part wasn't wrong, so I didn't correct him. But I wanted to hear Sean's feelings, so I asked him again. "Sean, did you and Samantha really want to live with us?" Sean hesitated before answering softly.
We've got 5 kids now, but I'm not home much because of my work. When Samantha heard about this from Dad, she said if it was okay with the 2 of you, she'd be willing to live together. The apartment we're in has gotten really cramped, and on top of that, the local government told us we need to move because of a new development.
It seemed like the timing worked out for them. "I understand. If you and Samantha are fine with it, then I have no problem. Let me just have a word with Greg. Could you head upstairs and wait for me?" Sean looked apologetic for a moment, but he did as I asked and went upstairs. Once I heard the door close, I glared at Greg. "Why did you invite them without asking me?" Greg, unfazed, calmly responded.
You would have just said no, right? You've become such a nagging old lady. Besides, I did them a favor. You should be grateful. You were lonely too, so it worked out, didn't it?
That wasn't the point I was trying to make. If he had properly discussed it with me, we could have at least made some preparations. Instead, he went ahead with everything without saying a word. Suspecting he had an ulterior motive, I pressed him, and Greg finally admitted, sounding annoyed.
It's about money. I told them if they want to live in my house, they need to chip in $1,000 a month for living expenses. Their apartment was costing them $700 a month, so $1,000 to live here is a bargain. I was just looking out for Sean and Samantha. You should have suggested it, but you're too clueless to think of these things.
Greg proudly puffed up his chest, acting as if he were the head of the household. He had no idea how much I'd sacrificed to get us to this point. Fine, I get it. I realized there was no point in continuing our conversation, so I quickly dropped the subject. The truth is, I cover most of our living expenses. Greg spends recklessly, and on his days off, he drinks as much as he possibly can. On top of that, he's a heavy smoker, and the amount of money he spends on cigarettes each month is likely outrageous. I'm not a stay-at-home wife. I work, but that seems irrelevant to him. To him, being a man and working for a company automatically makes him the head of the household. That's all he wants to believe. Recently, he mentioned that his bonus was smaller due to the company's poor performance. But I'm sure it was still a decent amount. He just wants to spend more on alcohol, cigarettes, and his own entertainment. So, in his brilliant scheme, he decided to invite Sean and his family to live here so he could squeeze them for living expenses. Currently, Greg only pays the mortgage while I cover all the utility bills, groceries, and everything else. He's almost completely unaware of this reality. I almost let out a sigh at how ridiculous Greg was being, but then I looked at my grandchildren, and suddenly, none of it seemed to matter. If anything, I wanted to enjoy living with Sean and his family. So I decided to shift my mindset and make the most of it. 3 months had passed since Sean and his family moved in. It was a regular day off, and Greg was, as usual, drinking in the middle of the day. When he ran out, he yelled at me.
Hey, I told you to keep the house stocked with booze. You're useless? That's why I can't stand having a good-for-nothing old lady like you around.
Drunken Greg shouted at me, saying he had run out of alcohol. Even with Sean, Samantha, and especially our grandchildren present, he didn't care at all. His outbursts continued.
A burden on society like you should at least show some respect to your husband. All you can do is like that to me because you're completely useless. Stop acting high and mighty when you barely even work.
Hearing this from a 58-year-old man was deeply saddening. Sean, seeing his father like this for the first time, looked horrified. Samantha sat with her head down, clearly uncomfortable. Greg's insults were aimed at me, but some of them probably struck a chord with her as well. Enough. Do you even realize your grandchildren are here? You're drunk and acting disgracefully. I snapped at Greg, but it only made him angrier.
Shut up. Have you ever earned as much as I have? You've lived off my income for years while working part-time, and now you have the nerve to lecture me? You're a burden, and everyone knows it. Right, Samantha? Isn't it awful to have such a useless mother-in-law?
Suddenly dragged into the conversation, Samantha was visibly uncomfortable. There's no way she could agree with Greg, but at the same time, she couldn't exactly disagree either. I felt a deep sense of shame for my husband, and just as I was about to scold him again,
Useless. Worthless. You're just an old lady who's past her prime. The women at my office are so much more attractive and charming. There's no comparison.
This wasn't new. Greg had been belittling me while drunk ever since Sean moved out. But for some reason, today I couldn't stand it any longer. Maybe it was because Sean and my grandchildren were here. My heart ached, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. I decided, once and for all, to confront Greg. I've tolerated your behavior for long enough without saying anything. Everyone in the living room turned to look at me, startled by my sudden outburst. I glanced at Samantha, and she gave a small nod before quietly taking the children upstairs. She's such a thoughtful person, I admired. I slowly turned my gaze back to Greg. He looked utterly confused, as if he had no idea what I was trying to say.
What are you talking about all of a sudden? I don't think I've ever forced anything on you.
Hearing those words, I realized my body was trembling with my anger. Why hadn't I said something sooner? I glanced up and met eyes with Sean, who was watching me with a worried expression.
Mom, well,
It was at that moment I finally understood. I had endured Greg's terrible treatment for all these years for Sean's sake. I'd been willing to sacrifice myself, living every day like that, and before I knew it, more than 20 years had passed. It seemed I had finally reached my breaking point, a point where I couldn't even control my emotions. Greg, oblivious to the situation, yawned and scrolled through his phone, then reached for a bag of chips and began munching noisily. Something snapped inside me. Why was I still married to this man? Sean had grown up, found a wonderful wife, Samantha, and had 5 beautiful children. I had endured it all for the sake of my son. But now that Sean was independent, there was no reason for me to keep this marriage going. Suddenly, a strange laugh bubbled up from inside me. Yes, I've grown so used to enduring, haven't I? It became second nature, like it was just normal. But I don't have to endure anymore. As I started muttering to myself, Greg looked at me with suspicion. Then he yelled at me.
What's with you? You're freaking me out. And hey, where's my booze? And go get me some more snacks while you're there.
Dad, that's enough. Don't you understand the situation right now?
Sean's voice didn't reach Greg, who was drunk and feeling bold. Then Greg said the one thing he should never have said.
Go against me, and we'll get a divorce, you parasite.
Silence fell over the room. Sean looked up at the ceiling as if to say, "It's over." And as for me,
What? Why are you laughing? You're creeping me out.
oh, really? Did I look like I was laughing? Somehow, I was smiling. I could feel it. My cheeks were twitching uncontrollably, and I knew exactly what kind of intense emotion was hiding behind that smile. Without a word, I stood up and handed Greg the paper I had hidden in the shelf. No, I let it flutter down over his head. As soon as it caught his eye, Greg's face changed.
Hey, what's this?
Fine, divorce it is. I've already moved into a $1 million mansion. At that moment, Greg's face looked like he'd been hit by a ton of bricks. Slowly, he repeated the word I had just said.
$1 million?
I've been wondering when to bring it up, but this was the perfect moment, one I'd never get again. So, I raised my voice and said it again. You said if I go against you, we'll get divorced, right? You said you'd kick me out of this house, right? Because this house is in your name, after all. The one with the mortgage is still hanging over your house. Fine, I'll leave. I'll divorce you just like you wanted. I was shocked by how loud and deep my voice had become. Greg stood there, dumbfounded, staring at me in disbelief, as if his once submissive wife had suddenly transformed into someone else entirely. The silence stretched on, and finally he swallowed hard and yelled back.
Have you lost your mind? You've been a stay-at-home wife under my care this whole time, with no value whatsoever. And now you're talking about $1 million? You don't even know the value of money, you idiot.
He slammed his hand on the table, making a loud noise, as if trying to intimidate me. Don't you dare underestimate me. I slammed my hand down in the same way, and Greg flinched, his shoulders jerking as he blinked rapidly. Just as I was about to lose myself in my anger, Sean stepped between us.
Calm down, Mom.
Greg, seeing that Sean was trying to soothe me and not him, gave a smug, triumphant look.
Look at that. How embarrassing. A woman over 50 getting calmed down by her son. What a joke.
Clearly still drunk, Greg kept spouting nonsense, but Sean cut him off with a calm voice.
I just said something because I'm worried about Mom.
Greg's eyes widened in shock, as if Sean had just slapped him with those words. Sean continued.
And yes, Mom really did move into that $1 million house. She's been wondering when to tell you. Honestly, I don't think she ever intended to keep it a secret. There were times when she was on the phone with a real estate agent and the documents were right there. The fact that you didn't notice is on you, Dad.
Greg shrunk in his seat, clearly deflated by Sean's pointed remarks. I'd never tried to hide anything about the house. There had been plenty of signs, but Greg never paid any attention to what I was doing. And about the whole support thing, you didn't even realize I've been off your support for years now, did you? I know you've never filled out a document about taxes, so you never know. Greg had never cared about politics, economics, or anything remotely complicated. Or rather, he avoided them because he couldn't understand them. When Greg was younger, he worked at a company where taxes weren't automatically deducted, so he fell behind on paying his local taxes and health insurance. And when we got married, I found out about his debt and the unpaid bills, which I cleared up using my savings. I did it because I loved him, because I wanted to help him. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be treated like this after over 30 years of marriage. If I'd known, I never would have married you, and I wouldn't have paid off your debt. But I can say it clearly now. The only person I really needed was Sean. I couldn't stand seeing Sean upset, so I went along with your controlling attitude. But it's all over now. With that, I let out everything I had been holding in for years. I loved you, so I paid off your debt. I loved you, so I paid for our entire wedding. I gave up my career to stay home because you wanted me to. And I endured all the cruel things you said, just so Sean could grow up in a stable home with both his parents. But today, with your behavior, I finally reached my limit. Greg's face twitched, his expression stiff.
Wait a minute. Isn't this a little sudden?
You're quick to lose your temper, so you probably don't get it. But people who don't normally get angry just bottle it up. Everyone has a breaking point. I've been holding back for years, enduring your mistreatment. But today, your actions finally pushed me over the edge. You know the saying, no use crying over spilled milk. Greg seemed to finally grasp the gravity of the situation, and he started to apologize.
Wait. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was pushing you this far. But can you explain something? $1 million? You don't have that kind of money.
I thought for a moment that he might actually be remorseful, but of course, he was only interested in the money. I let out an exaggerated sigh and glanced over at Sean. Sean seemed to catch on and spoke to Greg, his tone tired and exasperated.
Remember when Grandpa passed away 2 years ago and you didn't go to his funeral?
Well, that was...
That day, when Greg's father died, he dumped his responsibility of the funeral on me, saying he had an important business deal and couldn't take time off. He told me to just handle it.
That was beyond disrespectful. I know you and Grandpa didn't have the best relationship, but when your parent passes, you show up and say goodbye. That's just what you do. Grandpa's will said the funeral was for immediate family only, so none of the relatives knew you didn't come.
After saying that, Sean clenched his fist, visibly upset. I remember that day clearly too. Greg's father, a widower, had raised Greg all by himself, and I respected my father-in-law as a parent. So when Greg chose his job over his father's funeral, I was stunned. We couldn't postpone the funeral, so I stepped in as the host, and it was just me, Sean, Samantha, and my grandkids. And even then, he said something so callous in front of his father's house. When we visited Greg's childhood home to sort out his father's belongings after the funeral, he said something I'll never forget.
Hey, do you think I can sell my dad's old house?
It was always about money with Greg. I was too shocked to even respond. But that's just the kind of man Greg was, completely oblivious to everything.
By the way, what happened with the inheritance? I mean, if he lived in a dump like this, there probably wasn't much of anything left, right? There were no stories about him making a fortune or anything. You just handle it all for me, will you? I don't have the time or energy for that.
After that, Greg never brought up his father again. When I sold the land where his father's house once stood and handed Greg the money, he was over the moon. But there's more to that story. Since you are so curious about the $1 million, let me explain. It has to do with your father's inheritance. At that, Greg's eyes widened in shock, and his body language became animated in a way I had never seen before.
Wait, you're telling me my dad had that kind of inheritance? Why didn't anyone tell me? I'm his only heir.
You forgot that you waived your right to the inheritance, didn't you? Greg's loud outburst suddenly quieted down, and he seemed deep in thought, as if struggling to remember. I sighed again and walked over to the shelf. This time, instead of the divorce papers, I pulled out a different document and handed it to him. As soon as Greg looked at it, a frown creased his brow.
This, I think my dad's lawyer was.
Yes, it was the lawyer your dad appointed. You do remember, don't you? You had no interest in the inheritance and left everything to me. But because you were still technically the legal his heir, we discussed having you formally waive your inheritance rights, just in case. Greg swallowed hard, clearly starting to recall the conversation.
I guess we did talk about that. But if I had known there was $1 million involved, I wouldn't have waived anything.
I couldn't disagree with that. Greg, always so greedy when it came to money, would have clung to it if he'd known. But things were a bit different at that time, and Sean, who knew the full story, stepped in to fill in the gaps.
Because Dad waived his inheritance rights, they passed to me. But Grandpa's will clearly stated that he wanted everything to go to Mom, as she was the one who took care of him. Mom went through a lot, you know?
Sean was right. Greg had dumped all of his father's care on me, claiming it was the duty of a daughter-in-law.
That's why I also waived my rights, respecting Grandpa's wishes. That's when Mom inherited everything. At the time, the only cash left was about $10,000.
Greg's frown deepened even more. If there had only been $10,000, he must have been wondering where the $1 million came from. The truth lay in an unexpected place. Your father bought a house before he passed away. It was a designer house. He had a friend design it for him at a discounted price. But after your dad passed, the designer also passed away soon after. When that happened, the value of your dad's house skyrocketed. The designer had been famous in certain circles, and as word spread about the last home he ever designed, demand for it soared. The house became known as the final masterpiece of a renowned designer, and its value continued to climb. Although I had no immediate plans to sell it, real estate experts estimated its worth to be around $1 million. I had only researched the house out of curiosity because I kept receiving inquiries from people in the real estate world after word got out that I'd inherited it. After discussing it with a trusted friend in the industry, I decided not to sell and planned to move in. With Sean's family living with us, I had even considered passing the house on to him eventually. Then, as if he just had a brilliant idea, Greg suddenly spoke up.
Wait, hold on. If I waive my rights without knowing, can I still make a claim for my portion? There's something called legitimate portion, right?
Sean and I exchanged a knowing smile, which only seemed to frustrate Greg more. Sean spoke up, addressing him directly.
Dad, you already received the money from selling the land where Grandpa's house was.
Sean was right. You never bothered to learn about taxes or insurance, but when it comes to money coming in, you suddenly become an expert. We anticipated this. Back then, the designer was still alive, and your dad's house hadn't increased in value yet. The only assets were the $10,000 in cash and the land the house stood on. That was the entirety of the inheritance. My lawyer and me calculated everything. Just in case you tried to claim your legitimate portion later, we set aside your share and gave it to you back then. Sean, who works in a large company's legal department and is currently a paralegal, explained this to Greg, who still seemed unable to comprehend the situation.
We calculated the value of the designer house at the time, sold the land where Grandpa's house stood, and determined how much you'd owe if you tried to claim your inheritance portion. It turned out to be exactly the same amount as the money you got from the land sale. That means you've already received your portion of the inheritance, Dad. So, no matter how much you complain now, there's nothing more for you to get.
Greg's face went pale. He clearly hadn't expected that I had taken care of things so far in advance, 2 years ago. I knew exactly how Greg had spent those hundreds of thousands of dollars. I had kept quiet about it all this time, but now my patience was wearing thin, and everything I had bottled up began to spill over like a broken dam. You remember how, during your dad's funeral, you kept going on about work and business deals? The truth is, that was just an excuse. It overlapped with the time your mistress was giving birth, didn't it? That's why you didn't show up. The next moment, Greg gasped and then sat down on the floor.
You knew everything? You knew, and you stayed silent?
As I've said before, I had wanted to keep our family together. I had pretended not to know because I thought it was the best way to preserve what we had. But over time, the weight of my feelings built up without me realizing it, and my tolerance finally reached its limit. Yes, I knew. Your affair partner is a young woman in her 20s, right? She's on maternity leave now and pregnant with your second child. She's taking advantage of the company's benefits as a single mother, isn't she? I'm sure she's enjoying herself with that. I doubt the company has any idea you're the father of her children. And I hear your second baby is due soon. Did you think I didn't know? You also spent the money from selling the family land on her, didn't you? Greg's face twisted with guilt, as if a sound effect should have accompanied his uncomfortable expression. I didn't want to discuss this in front of Sean. After all, for me, that woman's child and the one she's about to have are complete strangers. But for Sean, they're technically half-siblings. Yet Sean, much to my surprise, had grown into an admirable adult.
Wow, I'm shocked, but honestly, I can't say I'm surprised, Dad. You always seemed capable of something like this. Mom, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how much you've endured for my sake. I wish you had leaned on me more. I want to be here for you, just as you were always there for me. And as for what I just heard, I can't let that slide, Dad. Isn't that right, Samantha?
At some point, Samantha had come downstairs and their kids were upstairs, distracted by the TV. She must have heard part of our conversation, especially about Greg's inappropriate behavior at work. Neither Greg nor I could figure out why Sean had brought Samantha into this. But soon, an unexpected truth came to light.
I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make things awkward. But, Dad, Samantha is the daughter of the CEO of your company.
What?
Greg turned his head towards Samantha with the awkwardness of a machine in need of oil. Her expression was icy cold.
Samantha works for a different company, so I doubt you've ever met her at work. You kept refusing to meet her parents, coming up with excuse after excuse. Well, that turned out to be your downfall. We had been saving up to finally have our wedding now that the kids are a bit older and life is more stable. But I've decided that we won't be inviting you.
As Sean finished speaking, Samantha walked outside, phone in hand, probably to inform her father of everything that had just happened. Greg, in a panic, tried to stop her, but Sean quickly restrained him, holding him back like a criminal caught by the police. Greg looked tortured, and I couldn't resist delivering the final blow. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention something earlier. Remember when I said I was no longer under your financial support? I've been working from home for a while now. It's not a huge amount, but I make about $3,000 a month. So, I don't need you anymore. I can stand on my own. Thank you for everything, and goodbye. My words were cold, dismissive. Greg reached out desperately for me, but his hand grasped only air. He would never reach me again. After this, Greg made a pathetic face and ran out of the house. He must have realized that he had no allies. Of course, before he left, I made sure to get his signature on the divorce papers. I went to the courthouse alone and filed for divorce, bringing our marriage to an official end. At last, everything had come to a close. It wasn't the absolute end, but it felt like a chapter had finally finished, and I let out a sigh of relief. From then on, Greg's life spiraled into disaster. Or perhaps it was simply karma catching up to him. In the end, I heard that he left the company. Given his inappropriate relationship with his junior colleague, it was inevitable. Greg's mistress was soon sued by Samantha's father, the CEO, for damages. Although it was true that she was a single mother, receiving financial support from Greg while also collecting company benefits under false pretenses was clearly fraudulent. With rumors spreading, she was forced to leave the company. I had already settled with her through proper compensation, and after that, I had no interest in her or how her life turned out. She had paid her dues, so I decided not to dwell on her any further. Even after she was out of the picture, there was no way Greg could walk the halls of the company with his head held high. Without a job, hit with the financial burden of paying me alimony, and having lost everyone's trust, he couldn't find another job either, or so I'd heard. He couldn't keep up with the mortgage on the house we once lived in and had to give it up. Eventually, I heard he ended up homeless, living on the streets. Rumor has it, he learned how to build a cardboard shelter from a homeless person and is now scraping by, exposed to the elements. Greg lost everything in a single day. Cut off from his son, divorced from me, estranged from his mistress and her child, and left with nothing to divide in the divorce. Having squandered most of what he had on his affair, there was nothing left for me to claim as marital property, and he ended up deeply in debt just to pay my alimony. But all of this was his own doing. This is the pitiful fate of a man who took his family for granted. As for me, I now live happily in the beautiful home left by Greg's father, surrounded by Sean, Samantha, and my 5 grandchildren. At first, I worried about being lonely in such a large house, but my concerns quickly vanished as the sound of the kids' laughter filled the space. I'm not a remarkable person, but I do have one thing to be proud of.
Mom, thank you for everything you've done.
At Sean and Samantha's wedding, I had the honor of stepping in for Samantha's late mother, performing the symbolic task of lowering her bridal veil. Watching this, Sean, overwhelmed with emotion, murmured his gratitude as he wiped away tears. Samantha also had tears in her eyes. I gently hugged them. Sean and Samantha, thank you. I'm so proud of you both. You're both my precious children. What I'm most proud of is that I have such a caring son, a wonderful daughter-in-law, and lively grandchildren. Nothing else compares.
A beautiful, sparkling ring. Even though I was at home, just having it made me feel as though I had wandered into a castle. But that blissful feeling quickly faded. When I tried to put the ring on, it didn't fit at all and got stuck halfway down my finger.
Sorry, did it not fit?
Bob said, looking a bit flustered. It was just a matter of getting the size adjusted later. I shook my head gently and said, "It's fine, don't worry about it." The next day, I headed to the store to request a size adjustment.
Hello, can I help you?
The crisp voice of the store clerk greeted me as I stepped into the store. I walked straight up to the counter and handed over the paper bag. "I'd like to get this resized, please." As soon as the store clerk looked inside the bag, her expression darkened.
Well, actually.
When she whispered what she knew, I was shocked. My eyes widened, and my lips trembled. "My name is Catherine, and I'm 44 years old. I live with my husband, Bob, who is the same age. We met back when we were both in college. We were taking the same class, but the lecture hall was big, and we sat far apart with our respective friends, so we never talked. In fact, we didn't even know each other's names. We were complete strangers. So, what made us start talking? It was during a group project one day. I was sitting with my friends near the back of the lecture hall, but since Bob barely made it in on time that day, he came in through the back door and had to sit close to us, away from his usual group of friends.
All right. Please form groups with the people sitting near you and start the discussion.
At the professor's words, I slowly turned around and made eye contact with Bob. Looking back, that might have been the first time I really took a good look at his face. I remember he had this expression like, "I've never talked to this person before," so I guess it was the same for him.
Okay, I'll be the facilitator.
Even though no one really wanted the role, and everyone looked reluctant, Bob took it on, albeit a little begrudgingly. Seeing that, I thought to myself, he's actually pretty responsible. After that, we somehow started talking more often about class, and before we knew it, we became close enough to have lunch together regularly. By the time we were juniors, Bob confessed his feelings to me.
Well, if it's okay with you, would you go out with me?
He was blushing all the way to his ears. I took his hand without hesitation, but I remember laughing because he used such a polite tone, which he usually didn't with me. After that, we sometimes had our share of arguments, but without any major problems. We continued dating and eventually got married a few years after we both started working. We don't have any children.
Wait, don't you want kids? Why don't you have any?
Well, it's just something between us. Sometimes acquaintances ask me these kinds of questions, but I just brush them off. When we were first married, I used to get annoyed when people kept bringing up kids, thinking they were being nosy, but as I've gotten older, it doesn't bother me as much. Both of us are busy with work, so we don't really have the time or energy to think about children. As long as we're both content with our decision, that's all that matters. Bob and I had been living a happy life, supporting each other like a team, but then one day,
Catherine, here, this is for you.
"What's this?" As soon as Bob got home, he handed me a small paper bag. I was puzzled, tilting my head as I took it, and nervously peeked inside. Inside, there was an elegant box lined with black velvet. What? A surprised sound escaped my lips. Even though I hadn't looked inside the boxlet, I could feel my heart start to race. I glanced over at Bob, and he had a proud look on his face, eagerly waiting for me to open it. With trembling hands, I pulled the box out and slowly opened it. Inside was a sparkling, glittering ring. The diamond set in it gave it an almost divine aura. Even though we were in our own home, just the presence of that ring made me feel like I had wandered into a castle. It was as if the regular LED lights had turned into chandeliers. The ordinary dining table became a grand round table, and the old faded rug had transformed into a red carpet. To me, jewelry always had that kind of romantic power. "Bob, what's with this ring?" I asked, my voice breaking with emotion. Bob, looking a bit embarrassed, scratched his cheek and turned his eyes away as he answered,
Well, it's our anniversary today, right? I figured I'd give you a present since it's a special occasion.
Hearing that, my eyes began to fill with warmth. Even though we'd been together for decades, I still felt a bit embarrassed about crying in front of Bob, so I bit my lip, trying to hold back the tears. There was a reason I was so overwhelmed with emotion. Of course, our wedding anniversary comes around every year, but neither Bob nor I had ever exchanged gifts. At most, we'd look each other in the eye and say a few words of gratitude. Or I'd just prepare his favorite dishes for dinner that night. So, receiving such an extravagant gift like a ring out of the blue stirred my emotions. If you suddenly give me something this expensive, of course I'm going to be shocked.
Well, it's fine, isn't it?
Still in a daze, I said that, and Bob, looking away, responded simply. I imagined him standing alone at a jewelry store, peering into the display case. Was he thinking about what would suit me? Did he ask the store clerk for recommendations on the design? As these thoughts filled my mind, I found myself smiling, and I covered my mouth with my hand to hide it, then asked Bob, "So, can I try it on now?" Without looking at me, he answered gruffly,
Of course. I bought it for you, didn't I?
"He's not going to put it on my ring finger like at our wedding, is he?" I chuckled and started sliding the ring onto my finger myself. Oh. A surprised sound escaped me. The ring didn't fit at all and got stuck halfway between my first and second knuckles. If I tried to force it any further, it might get stuck and cut off my circulation. Not wanting that to happen, I took the ring off and placed it back in the box. Did Bob misjudge my size, or though I don't want to think about it, did he get the same size as my wedding ring, but my fingers have gotten bigger since then?
Sorry, did it not fit?
Bob said, looking a bit flustered. He must have been disappointed that the gift he had put so much thought into didn't work out. It was just a matter of getting the size adjusted later. I shook my head gently and said, "It's fine, don't worry about it. Hey, I can get it resized myself, so could you tell me the name of the store?" When I asked, Bob quickly turned his head away and went silent. He had a look on his face like he was trying to hide something. It was obvious he didn't want to answer, like he was saying, "Don't ask." I frowned, tilting my head in confusion. If I don't know the store, how can I get the size adjusted? Why is he acting so weird about it? Why won't you tell me? I pressed him, but he still didn't say a word. In fact, the more I asked, the worse his mood got, and his expression grew more tense. Eventually, he snapped.
Enough already. I'll take care of it, so just wait, okay?
Why is he getting so mad over a simple question? His sharp, cold voice stunned me, and I just froze, eyes wide open. Of course, I couldn't ask him again. Bob shot me a brief glare before stomping off to his room, slamming the door behind him. The dinner I had worked so hard to prepare sat untouched on the dining table, looking lonely. What the hell? I finally muttered about 5 minutes after he had stormed off. Did I do something wrong? I just asked a normal question. The shock and confusion lingered, and my voice came out in a raspy whisper. In the empty room, my questions just hung in the air, with no one to answer them. Moving slowly, I covered the untouched dinner with plastic wrap and put it in the fridge. I figured I'd eat it tomorrow, and then I went to bed. The next morning, when I woke up, Bob had already left the house. The place was completely silent. I slipped into my slippers and shuffled over to the kitchen, checking the fridge, but it didn't look like he had touched last night's dinner. Since I wasn't really hungry either, I didn't bother preparing breakfast. Instead, I plopped down on the couch in the living room. I picked up the bag with the ring, which I had left on the dining table. Why was Bob so mad? Even after a night's sleep, I still couldn't figure out what had upset him so much. I fought back, wondering if I had done something to bother him, but nothing came to mind. I didn't do anything wrong, I just asked for the store's name, that's all. As I kept thinking about it, I started feeling more and more irritated. I took a deep breath to calm myself down, and as I looked closely at the bag and box, something caught my eye. Wait a minute, this is a store I've been to several times. Last night, I had been so overwhelmed by the surprise of Bob giving me the ring that I hadn't really looked, but the brand name on the bag was from a store I knew well. Well, I can just go there myself then. I stood up, got dressed, put on my makeup, and decided to go to the store that very day to get the ring resized.
Hello. Can I help you?
The crisp voice of the store clerk greeted me as I stepped into the store. I walked straight up to the counter and handed over the paper bag. I'd like to get this resized, please. The store clerk had helped me before and seemed to remember me.
Catherine. Of course, I'll take care of it.
She smiled brightly as she tucked the bag. As soon as she looked inside the bag, her expression darkened. Her sudden change in demeanor startled me, and I leaned in. Is something wrong? My voice cracked from nervousness, but she didn't even crack a smile. Her face remained serious and clouded with concern.
Well, actually.
When she whispered what she knew, I was shocked. My eyes widened, and my lips trembled. Apparently, a few days ago, Bob had come to the store with another woman to buy the ring. The two of them were walking arm in arm, leaning close to each other, and looked extremely intimate. No, that can't be. The idea that Bob had betrayed me was unbearable, and the room seemed to spin. My lips, hands, and feet started trembling, and I felt like I might collapse if I didn't hold myself together. But remembering that I was in a store, I somehow managed to stay on my feet. I stood there, blinking, trying to recall Bob's behavior over the past few weeks. Now that I thought about it, he had been coming home late more often, claiming work had gotten busier. He'd started working weekends, eating dinner out without telling me. The shock of him giving me the ring had almost made me forget, but the signs were there. And when I had asked about the store, his angry reaction, it must have been because he was scared I'd find out he had been there with someone else.
Catherine.
The store clerk's voice brought me back to reality, noticing my silence. As the shock and sadness of Bob's betrayal washed over me, I felt a wave of anger begin to build. I made sure not to show it on my face since I was in public, but inside, the flames of anger were burning fiercely. The thought of how I couldn't forgive him kept swirling in my mind. To avoid showing it, I bit my lower lip and clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Thank you for telling me. I thanked the store clerk, but inside, I was already planning my revenge. First, I need solid proof of his affair so I can make this work in my favor. Fueled by anger, my body moved with surprising efficiency. My mind was razor sharp, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I hired a private investigator to look into Bob's activities and get detailed information about his behavior. The investigation revealed that the woman he had been seeing was a colleague who had joined his company just last year. I never thought he'd cheat with someone from work. Her name was Jessica, and she was more than a decade younger than us, in her early 20s. The age gap was so wide that they could almost be parent and child. The fact that Bob had gotten involved with someone so young made my skin crawl. What kind of person has such little sense of morality? Disgusting. When I realized her age, I unconsciously muttered those words. My voice was so low that it didn't even sound like mine. The envelope containing the investigation results was full of evidence, including photos of Bob and Jessica on dates. As I stared at the photos, I found myself letting out deep sighs over and over, without even realizing it. Bob, fawning over a young woman, with a foolish grin on his face. His arm eagerly wrapped around her waist, filled with excitement. His finger pointing toward a towering hotel in the bustling nightlife district, as if to say, "Let's hurry." Disgusting. The word escaped my mouth again, unbidden. This time, my voice was colder and lower than I had ever heard it before. The investigation also revealed that the ring Bob had given me on our anniversary had originally been intended for Jessica, but she didn't want it, so he passed it on to me. In short, he had done something incomprehensible, handing down a gift meant for his mistress to his wife. Looking back on that moment, it wasn't because he was embarrassed that he avoided eye contact. It was because he was worried about his affair being discovered. When the ring didn't fit, he panicked, fearing I'd realize it had been sized for another woman's finger. That's why his voice sounded so desperate. So he hadn't been thinking about me at all, had he? A few days later, during dinner with Bob, I finally worked up the courage to speak. "Hey, about the ring." As soon as I started speaking, Bob's hand froze. We were having burgers for dinner. Just as he lifted his burger, I brought up the topic, and the burger slipped from his hand before it reached his mouth. He didn't even seem to care about it at all. He stared at me with a dumbfounded look, his mouth half open. I handed him a tissue, but he didn't take it, and instead said,
"Well, like I said, I'll take it in for resizing. I'm just busy with work right now, so wait until my day off. By the way, about work today."
He was trying to change the subject. Of course, he was determined to keep up the act. He could have just admitted what he did and come clean. The fact that he was trying so hard to cover it up meant he knew just how wrong what he had done was. Not that I expected him to confess to the affair anyway. I sighed softly and stood up, walking to my room to grab the paper bag with the ring. I came back, opened the box in front of Bob, and, with a flourish, slid the ring onto my ring finger.
"What? Didn't it not fit you?"
Bob started to panic. He reached out, as if to stop me. His reaction was so pathetic that I couldn't help but laugh faintly. He didn't seem to understand why I was smiling, and a frown creased his forehead. Contrary to his expectations, the ring fit perfectly this time, sliding onto my finger without any trouble and sparkling beautifully. Even after learning about the affair, a diamond's beauty remains. But what about him? He went after a woman much younger than himself, and when she refused the ring, he pretended it was chosen for me and gave it to me instead. Then, just because I asked about the store, he yelled at me to cover up his affair. It all makes him look incredibly ugly. I actually went to get the ring resized myself. That's when the store clerk told me that you were there with another woman. As I calmly said this, Bob's breath caught in his throat. Realizing that I knew everything, he lowered his eyes in resignation. Even seeing him like that didn't stop me. I kept confronting him with the truth. Her name is Jessica, right? The woman who joined your company last year. At that, Bob shot up from his chair and immediately started apologizing.
I'm sorry. She didn't mean anything to me. Please forgive me.
His voice was slightly muffled, but I heard his apology clearly. Even so, there was no way I could forgive him. He was about to give her a ring, and now he's claiming it was just a fling. That's laughable. I couldn't see my reflection without a mirror, but I was certain that my eyes, filled with disbelief, had turned ice cold. When I snorted, Bob flinched, his shoulders trembling as he kept his head down. He kept begging me not to divorce him, as if he were muttering to himself. No, I'm not forgiving you. I'm divorcing you. When I cut him off like that, he let out a groan and then started sniffling. But I had already made up my mind, and no amount of crying or pleading would change that. After a few days of packing, I left the house.
Please, don't leave. Don't divorce me.
During that time, Bob apologized and begged me over and over, but I ignored him every single time. I pretended not to hear, not to see him. In my mind, he was already a stranger. The man I once thought was serious and responsible back when we were in college was long gone. When did he become the kind of person who could cheat so easily and then, when faced with being left, desperately beg not to get divorced? It's pathetic. But it didn't matter anymore. From now on, I wouldn't have anything to do with him. Whether he regrets it or reflects on his actions no longer matters to me. My resolve never wavered, and I walked away, leaving Bob behind, crying and pleading. Then, my smartphone started ringing with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer a call like that, finding it suspicious, but it kept ringing over and over, even when I ignored it. Who is this? So persistent. Annoyed, I frowned and reluctantly pressed the answer button, putting the phone to my ear. Hello.
Are you Bob's ex-wife?
The voice on the other end of the line was Jessica's. She explained that she had gotten my number by snooping through Bob's phone. I had imagined her having a shrill voice, but instead, it was oddly low and serious. There was a sense of urgency, as if she couldn't wait to get to the point.
Well, I need you to take Bob back.
I let out a deep sigh at her words. The truth was, Bob didn't turn much, and I had been the one supporting most of our household expenses. If he had shown even a little effort to manage his spending, I might have been able to tolerate it, but he had a serious problem with overspending. Whenever he wanted something, he would buy it without thinking about the consequences. which had eventually led him into debt. Up until now, I had been the one paying off his debts. But now that we were divorced, that was no longer my responsibility. I wasn't going to pay off someone else's debt, so from now on, Bob would have to slowly repay it all on his own. On top of that, he had borrowed a large sum of money from his parents to buy the diamond ring, so he was on the hook for that too. To Jessica, Bob was nothing more than a low-income, debt-ridden burden. That's why she wanted me to take him off her hands.
Please. It's a huge problem for me if he stays with me.
Jessica's voice turned into a shrill cry. Bob was wrong for cheating, but Jessica treating people like disposable objects was just as bad. In a way, they were perfect for each other. Neither of them had a shred of decency. But I had no interest in dealing with Bob anymore either. I refuse. Don't ever contact me again. With that, I hung up without hesitation.
Wait, please.
I pretended not to hear her desperate plea. Afterward, it turned out that Bob was eventually dumped by Jessica too. With no one left to help him, he was left struggling under a mountain of debt and the alimony I had claimed, eventually losing his way. Even when I heard this, not a shred of sympathy stirred in my heart. He had brought it all on himself. As for Jessica, she didn't get off easy either. The whole affair was exposed at work, and she was fired. She's now having a hard time finding another job. When my lawyer told me that, I secretly smiled and muttered to myself, "Serves you right." As for the ring Bob gave me, I've already thrown it away. They say the object itself isn't guilty, but keeping it would only remind me of Bob and Jessica. Instead, I bought myself a new ring as a reward, and I cherish it. The beauty of the gemstones brings light to my heart.
3 years into my marriage with a luxury clothing store, a loud voice echoed just before lunch.
Karen, where are you? Come here right now.
The moment I heard that voice, it felt like my heart was being squeezed. It was my father-in-law, Bob, and that tone was the one he used when he was angry. "I'll be right there." I thought I had shouted back, but my throat tightened and no sound came out. When I got to the front of the store, there was a male customer with a red face, placing a suit on the table with his arms crossed. In front of him, Bob and my husband, Joe, were bowing repeatedly. Apparently, the suit he ordered looked nothing like what had been delivered. I looked at the suit and felt like I was in a daze. No, this isn't what I prepared. When I turned around, Bob had a defiant smile on his face. While claiming they'd find what the customer wanted right away, my mother-in-law, Judy, brought the complete set of suit I had prepared. The customer left the store with a look of relief. Not again. So that's how it's going to be. I can't live with these people anymore. I've tried for 3 years, but to be treated like this, I'm leaving. I want a divorce. As if he had been waiting for these words, Bob raised his voice.
Oh, finally realized the difference in status between you and us. It's about time you understood that. Yeah, that's right. Leave. Just go.
With the cold laughter of my in-laws behind me, I packed my few belongings in the dim room. However, there was one secret I hadn't told them. I never mentioned this, but as soon as they heard my words, The color drained from everyone's faces. My in-laws would come to regret what they had done. My name is Karen. I lead a busy life working at a major advertising agency. Today, I had a meeting with a client early in the morning. I returned to the office just before noon. I went straight to my boss to report. I'm back.
Oh, how did that issue go?
I explained the budget situation to both sides and they understood. They also reviewed the designs that were already prepared, and I've informed the designer about the necessary revisions. We can have the final review at the start of the week.
Good. That's a relief. It would have been a disaster if we messed up with such a big client. Thanks for following up so well. I'll make sure the executives know.
Thank you very much. Well then, after finishing my report, I quickly returned to my desk. All right, it's time for the next meeting. Without sitting down, I organized my things on the desk, then headed to the locker room to check my makeup and hair in the mirror. Okay. I nodded to my reflection, grabbed the bag with my materials, and headed to a nearby restaurant where the meeting was scheduled. On the way, I found myself thinking about Joe Brown. We met a year and a half ago. It was a business meeting. As the heir of a luxury clothing store, he wanted to launch an advertisement aimed at young people. The campaign was a success. Normally, that would have been the end of our relationship as client and agency, but Joe kept in touch personally afterward. At first, we hung out as friends, but as I got to know him, I found that we liked the same movies and food. Our relationship quickly deepened, and I began to have feelings for Joe. Suddenly, I stopped and looked back at the office. Joe's words from a week ago echoed in my mind.
I want you to marry me, and I want you to quit your job and help me run my family business. Don't worry about it. My parents handle most of it, so there's nothing you need to do.
I was genuinely happy to be proposed to. My mom passed away a few years ago. Due to his work, my dad and I couldn't live together, so we only kept in touch occasionally. My job was fulfilling, so I didn't feel lonely, but I had resigned myself to spending my life alone, thinking I'd missed my chance at marriage. That's why Joe brought new colors into my life. But can I really quit my jobs? Will I get along with his parents? I was worried and couldn't make up my mind. But today, I decided to give him an answer. I looked ahead and hurried to the restaurant. It was a restaurant on the top floor of a luxury hotel with a stunning view of the starry sky and the dazzling city lights below. Being here felt like being a character in a movie.
Did you see that new movie the other day?
The new movie? Which one? There are so many out this month.
You know, the one with Benjamin Ford as the lead. It's a period drama.
Oh, that one. I've been dying to see it, but I just haven't had the time. Joe's eyes lit up as he shared his thoughts about the movie.
You have to watch it. I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't go into details, but Benjamin is just amazing in it. He's definitely one of American's biggest stars.
You're right. I'll go see it on my next day off. After that, a silence settled between us. The voices of people around us enjoying their meals seemed to grow louder. I knew what we needed to talk about next. But neither of us could take that step forward. If anyone was going to, it had to be me. Steeling myself, I drained the wine left in my glass and looked Joe straight in the eyes. I've thought a lot about marriage since then. Joe stared back at me silently. His hand gripped the tablecloth so tightly that his knuckles turned white. To be honest, I'm scared to quit my job. I'm worried about whether I can manage at the clothing store and if I'll be able to get along with your parents.
Don't worry. No matter what my parents say, I'll protect you. All I want is for you to be with me.
With those words, my wavering heart finally made a decision. I understand. I want to walk through life with you, Joe. I said it and looked at him. The hands clenched on my lap trembled, and the emotions welling up inside spilled from my eyes. After a while, Joe had tears in his eyes. For a moment, we looked at each other, then let out a small laugh. 3 years later, as Karen Brown, I was walking down an old country road under a cloudy sky, dragging my heavy feet. I was on my way back from running an errand. I knew I had to get back as quickly as possible. But the more I thought about the Brown clothing store, the more my legs felt like lead. When I slid open the store's door, an older man in a gray suit turned and glared at me. It was my father-in-law, Bob Brown.
You're late. Where have you been wandering around? When will you understand that you're not in some cushy position here? You're completely useless.
Here we go again. But trying to explain myself wouldn't do any good. He wouldn't listen. There's only one thing I can do. I'm sorry. I said yes and apologized.
That's it? Do you think a few words like that solve everything? You really are an ignorant woman. Can't you come up with a more thoughtful apology? Or have you been living your life aimlessly until now?
I felt the blood drain from my head, and a sharp pain throbbed deep in my brain. Even so, I kept my head bowed and gritted my teeth. I'm deeply sorry for returning late. I'll reflect on this to ensure it doesn't happen again, and I'll make sure you never have to say this to me twice. Bob didn't say a word, just let out a snort and turned his back on me. As I was about to leave, Judy, my mother-in-law, walked in dressed in a floral dress more suited for a younger woman.
Oh, you useless girl. Didn't I tell you to bring the laundry in by 4 o'clock? Can't you manage such a simple task? Because of you, I'm leaving later than I planned. What do you have to say for yourself?
I'm sorry.
That's not it. Didn't I just tell you how to apologize properly? Did you already forget? Or are you just not trying from the start?
I couldn't think anymore. I stood there stunned, while Judy let out a loud sigh.
Again with the silent treatment. Fine. Is this how you troubled your mom too? Quit wasting time and start cleaning or making dinner. Surely even you can manage that much.
Yes. Judy left those words behind and walked briskly out of the store. I did as I was told and began cleaning the living room at the back of the store. The bad weather made the old house even darker. But if I turned on the lights, Bob would complain. A woman of your standing shouldn't be using electricity, so I had to clean in the dark. I had to be careful with my footing, which put a lot of strain on my back and shoulders. To top it off, when my sister-in-law, Samantha's baby, started fussing, I had to stop cleaning to change his diaper. How did things end up like this? I sighed in the dim room. I had thought a happy life was waiting for me, but we didn't even have a wedding ceremony. I didn't want Joe to know about my dad, so I told him that I was raised by a single parent and that my mom and other relatives were all gone. After that, my in-laws' attitude changed completely. They started saying it was a disgrace for someone like me to join a long-established clothing store. I ended up being treated almost like an employee. Worse, Judy seemed to see me as both an employee and a housekeeper, dumping all the household chores on me while she went out and had fun. My sister-in-law, Samantha, who had come back after her divorce, pushed her child's care onto me and went out partying at night. The clothing store business wasn't exactly thriving either. They also ran a general store, and I was told to handle not only the clothing store but also the purchasing, inventory, and accounting for the general store, all by myself. If sales didn't improve, Bob would shout at me. Mistakes were, of course, not tolerated. Yet, I wasn't paid. Early in my marriage, I once consulted Bob about getting a salary, but he just laughed at me through his nose. I talked to Joe about it, but he just brushed me off, saying, "It won't be a problem once you take over the store, so just hang in there." Still, at first, I tried my best to contribute to the clothing store. I've been through some tough situations in my office lady days. I was confident in my customer service skills. Advertising and promotion were my strong suits. I rearranged the merchandise, highlighted best-selling products, and used my spare time to distribute flyers door to door. Sales improved, and the store started to thrive compared to before. This was clearly the result of my efforts. However, Bob was against my methods, saying he didn't like them. He claimed they lowered the store's dignity. If the store went under, there wouldn't be anything left to worry about. But what hurt the most was Joe's attitude. While I was out there desperately serving customers, he was off having business lunches or playing golf. He wouldn't even make eye contact or talk to me. He didn't treat me as his wife. So naturally, we, as a couple, did not have any sexual intercourse at night. Yet Bob and Judy kept pushing for us to have a successor. I wanted to have a child with the man I loved, and I was willing to put in the effort. But this isn't something I can do alone. In our current situation, there's no way I could have a child with Joe. If they want to complain, they should talk to him. But I'm the one who gets blamed. Being criticized for something beyond my control is the worst pain. What kept me from breaking down were the kind words from the people in the neighborhood. Because of them, I felt like I could keep going. One day, as I was washing dishes in the kitchen, Judy threw an envelope at me.
"A letter came for you."
The envelope fell into the sink. I quickly grabbed it, but it was too late. It was already soaked with water. I sighed and dried the envelope with a towel. I turned it over to look for a name, but the plain white envelope only had my name and address on it. Who could this be from? I stopped washing, sat down, and tore open the envelope to take out its contents. A letter and a ticket. I gasped when I saw it. It was an invitation to a special movie screening. Not only that, but there was also a stage greeting and a talk event with the actors was scheduled. And the guest star was. I hastily picked up the letter. I carefully read through each page, not missing a single detail. I could feel the corners of my mouth naturally start to lift. When was the last time I felt this way? Thank you. I murmured to the letter, then quickly put it back in the envelope. I went to my room and gently placed it in the deepest part of the shelf, making sure it wouldn't wrinkle. I covered it with some trinkets to keep it hidden and closed the drawer. This should be good. Now the only question is whether I can get the day off. That's the biggest hurdle for me. I returned to the kitchen and stared at the calendar. I've been married into this family and working at this store for about 3 years. I've taken only 3 days off in all that time. Once when I took my nephew to the hospital, once when the family went on a trip and left me to watch the house, and once when I got stranded on my way back from visiting a distant customer due to a hurricane. Of course, the concept of paid leave doesn't exist here. How can I ask for a day off?
Hey, what are you standing there daydreaming for? You're in the way, move.
Oh, I'm sorry. Samantha gave me a suspicious look, her eyes scanning my face.
What's with you? You seem awfully cheerful. I hope you fed my kid breakfast.
Yes, I made sure he ate. Samantha turned her gaze away from me and looked at the calendar. She smirked and looked back at me.
You're hoping for a day off, aren't you? But do you really think someone as useless as you could get permission from Dad?
When I stayed silent, Samantha leaned in close and whispered in my ear.
How about I talk to Dad and get you that day off?
Really?
Of course, there's a condition. I'm a bit short on money. $5,000. If you can lend me that, I'll tell Dad to let you have a day off. Don't worry. Unlike Joe, I'm not heartless.
$5,000. That's a hefty sum, but if I dip into my savings from my office job, I can manage it. If it means I can buy a day off that I desperately need. The problem is whether Samantha will keep her promise. But since listening to her is the only way I can take a day off, I had no choice but to silently pay her the money. All right, I'll get it ready right away, so please wait. I grabbed my wallet and rushed out of the store. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest bank through the hot, humid summer air. The sky, which had been clear just a moment ago, was quickly darkening due to the cumulus clouds, and I could faintly hear thunder. When I reached the bank, I withdrew $5,000. I hurried out of the bank, only to find that large raindrops had already begun to make splotches on the road. I have to hurry. I rushed back to the store, but the rain started pouring heavily. I shoved the envelope with the money into my pocket to keep it dry. However, I tripped on my way back. I scraped my palms and knees, but I stood up and finally made it back to the store. I couldn't go in through the front in this muddy state, or I'd get scolded, so I entered through the back door. I immediately handed the envelope with the $5,000 to Samantha. She smirked and counted the bills one by one.
All right, good.
Well, about my day off.
What? Did I promise you that?
No way. After getting myself all muddy and paying such a large amount, this was too much. I instinctively reached out to grab her arm.
Hey, don't touch me with those dirty hands. I'm just joking. I'll talk to Dad for you, but I can't promise he'll say yes.
After that, I cleaned myself up and stood at the front of the store. I've done all this, so it should be fine. I'm definitely going to get my day off. I was worried about whether Samantha would keep her promise, but surprisingly, it was settled rather easily. Bob didn't seem happy, but he couldn't just dismiss his daughter's request. But I couldn't let my guard down just yet. If I made a mistake, I might lose my day off. So, as I eagerly awaited the day of the screening, I threw myself into my work even more than before. Having something to look forward to really changes your motivation at work. Nothing major happened after that, and soon it was the day before the screening. I couldn't wait for the end of the workday. I kept looking at the clock more than usual, which made time crawl by. My head was already filled with thoughts of the screening. But just before lunch, as I was checking the inventory in the back of the store, a loud voice echoed.
Karen, where are you? Come here right now.
The moment I heard that voice, it felt like my heart was being squeezed. My mind went blank. For my 3 years of experience, I knew all too well. That tone of voice is the one he uses when he's angry. No, I don't want to go. But that's not an option. If I don't go quickly, I'll just get scolded even longer. I'll be right there. I thought I shouted loudly, but my throat tightened and my voice came out like a cicada falling to the ground. When I got to the front of the store, there was a regular customer with a red face, placing a suit on the table with his arms crossed. I was familiar with this man. He had been coming to the store often since I started working. Bob and Joe were repeatedly bowing their heads. However, there was something strange about their apology. The customer couldn't see it, but there was a sly smile on Bob's lips. "I'm sorry, I'm late. What seems to be the problem?"
What is the meaning of this? This is completely different from the suit I ordered. I have an important ceremony tomorrow. What do you intend to do about this?
I looked at the suit the man had brought in, feeling like I was in a daze. I distinctly remembered taking his order the other day and carefully selecting the suit. But the one in his hands now was entirely different. I may be inexperienced, but I'm not so unskilled as to select such a poor suit.
Hey, Karen, don't just stand there. Apologize to him. This is a serious issue.
But I didn't pick this suit.
What are you talking about? You're the one who dealt with this customer. Do you think you can use ignorance as an excuse? Don't you feel sorry for the customer?
I couldn't say a word. This is just wrong. But no matter how much I pleaded in my heart, there was no one to save me. As I stood there, Judy came out from the back of the store.
"Sir, I deeply apologize for what happened. We've prepared the suit according to your original order. Could you please take a look?"
She respectfully placed a set of suit on the table. I was shocked when I saw it. It was the very suit I had selected for the customer. There was no mistake. I had chosen it with great care to fulfill his wishes. All three of them turned to me with twisted smiles. But the customer didn't notice. He checked the suit eagerly and clapped his hands.
Wonderful. Yes, this is it. This is exactly the suit I ordered. Thank goodness. Now there's no issue for tomorrow's ceremony. I'm sorry for shouting.
No, the fault is mine for entrusting this to an inexperienced person. I'll make sure she's properly trained, so please continue to favor us.
Inexperienced?
The man glanced at the suit and then stared at me. I felt so uncomfortable that all I could do was bow my head silently.
Well, all right then. I'll be going now.
As soon as the man left, the scolding began.
Honestly, anyone can just bow their head. I thought you were a bit smarter than that.
Really, it's such poor upbringing. Living under the same roof with you makes us feel dirty.
I had reached my limit. If I made a mistake, I'd apologize as much as needed. But this is something I can't accept. I don't know. I didn't choose that suit. Another employee delivered it.
Stop making excuses.
But I really didn't.
Well, it's possible. Maybe I intentionally delivered a different suit than the one you picked, Karen. But you have no proof, do you?
What is this man thinking? What does he gain from doing this? I looked at Joe's face, but the man I once loved was no longer there.
Listen, Karen, you're a lowly person. You might think you've contributed a bit to the store's sales, but we are in a different league. It's time you understand that.
Bob said this and laughed loudly. What a repulsive laugh. If I'm at the bottom, what does that make you? I wanted to shout that, but I no longer had the energy. And then Judy delivered the final blow.
"Oh, and you. No day off for you tomorrow."
What?
Obviously, someone as useless as you should be working twice as hard as us. Not just tomorrow. No more days off from now on.
The moment the reality of not being able to go to the screening hit me, a dark, inky drop fell into my heart. In no time, it spread and dyed my heart black. Going to the screening was my only source of joy. If that's taken away, what is there left to look forward to? What's going to happen to my life? Will I just be worked like a slave until I'm old, discarded like trash when I'm no longer useful? And when there's nothing left of me, will I be abandoned by society, leaving this world in loneliness? If that's the kind of miserable life ahead of me, I have no choice but to leave this place. There's no reason to endure this any longer. I've tried for 3 years, but that's it. I'm tired. I'm leaving. I want a divorce. The three of them exchanged glances for a moment and then burst into laughter.
Yeah, that's right. Get out.
We took in a woman with no family, and this is what we get. Well, an ungrateful person like you won't be accepted anywhere.
Yeah, you just weren't cut out for this house. I'd like you to leave quickly, but you'll need to do the handover first. You'll work at least until tomorrow.
I stood up without saying a word. I no longer wanted to breathe the same air as these people. As I went into the living room, Samantha was there smirking at me.
What a shame. But I'm not giving back the money. And don't even think about getting alimony from my brother.
Without answering, I went to my room and started packing my things. Sadly, it didn't take long. After living here for 3 years, all I had left were 2 cardboard boxes and a bag. As I stared at them, a dry laugh escaped my lips. I should have left much earlier, but the time I lost won't come back. Even if I can't go to the screening, I still have things to do. The next day, I handed over the documents to the other employees. I also prepared the divorce papers and took care of various administrative tasks until the end of the day. With that, my final jobs was done. But the screening was already over by then. If that's the case, maybe I'll use my remaining savings to treat myself to a nice meal. I was absent-mindedly sweeping outside the store, gazing up at the sky.
Excuse me, Karen.
Startled by the sudden voice, I turned around to see the regular customer who had visited yesterday. Oh, I'm so sorry about yesterday. But he raised his hand to stop me before I could finish.
There's no need to apologize. I know everything. That suit was chosen by you. There must have been some misunderstanding. I'm sorry. You must have been scolded.
No, it's not like that. This unexpected turn of events left me at a loss for words.
From the moment I placed my order, I felt your kindness. You carefully chose the best items to match my preferences for the suit's color and the tie. Inexperienced is far from the truth. Karen, you are top-notch.
Hearing his kind words, his figure suddenly blurred as my eyes filled with tears. With just those words, it felt like the past 3 years had been worth it.
Actually, there's someone I want you to meet.
He said, pulling out his phone to make a call. Moments later, 3 luxury black cars pulled up in front of the store.
What's going on? What's happening?
Did Mr. President come to town?
The unusual sight in the small town caused quite a stir among the neighbors. The man opened the back door of the last car. A distinguished man in a suit stepped out. His commanding presence made everyone gasp. Seeing him, tears welled up in my eyes even more.
It's Benjamin Ford.
One of the neighbors shouted. That triggered an uproar like a beehive being disturbed.
Is that a Hollywood star in a small town like this?
He really does exist.
As I was about to run toward Benjamin Ford, Bob and Joe came running out from the back of the store. They shoved me aside. I stumbled and fell to the ground. Bob didn't even glance at me. Instead, he was wringing his hands and bowing repeatedly.
Welcome, Mr. Ford. Please come inside.
But Benjamin Ford kept his eyes fixed on me.
Oh, don't mind her. She's just an incompetent fool we fired. Please come inside. I'll show you something even better than what you're wearing.
Without saying a word, Benjamin Ford knelt down and extended his hand to me.
Are you okay, Karen? Are you hurt?
I'm okay, thank you. I took his hand and stood up. He brushed the dirt off my knees with his hand. Bob and Joe were staring at us, their mouths wide open.
What is going on?
Well, I didn't mention it before, but this is my dad. The moment they heard that, the blood drained from their faces. Their legs trembled.
But you said you didn't have a dad.
I'm sorry. I kept it a secret because I didn't want everyone to make a big fuss. Suddenly, Bob lunged forward and prostrated himself in front of my dad. Seeing this, Joe hurried to do the same beside him.
I'm terribly sorry. I didn't know. Your precious daughter. From now on, we'll take full responsibility for taking care of her. Please, I beg you to continue your patronage with your friends.
Lift your heads.
My dad spoke quietly. From his expression, even I couldn't tell what he was thinking.
You just said you would offer something better than this suit, didn't you?
Bob lifted his head with his eyes shining.
Yes, of course.
But that's odd. This suit was tailored by your store.
What? That's impossible.
Bob looked at the man standing beside my dad and gasped. He finally realized this was the same customer who had come in yesterday.
How can I introduce my friends to someone who can't even recognize the suit made by their own store? Before you insult someone's daughter as incompetent, you should work on yourself.
That's right. This suit was the one I had chosen for the regular customer. But I never imagined that my dad would be the one wearing it. Bob's face turned a deep red. He gritted his teeth and clenched his hands tightly on the ground. Joe seemed too ashamed even to lift his head, his hunched back trembling.
I knew my daughter had married into this family, so I sent my assistant here to observe how things were going. I investigated various things and concluded that this place is not suitable for my daughter.
Dad, it's okay. It's over now. Our divorce is final and the handover is complete.
All right, then come with me. Let's take our time to talk. It's been a while.
I'll go get my things. As I went to get my belongings, Judy and Samantha came out, looking thrilled.
Benjamin Ford is really here. Amazing.
Hey, you, go get Karen's things, right now.
Startled by the force of his words, Judy quickly brought my things. After loading them into the trunk of the car, I sat next to my dad in the back seat, leaving the store behind.
I'm sorry. I should have helped you sooner. I just assumed you were living happily.
My dad closed his eyes tightly, his face showing pain.
But when you didn't come to the screening and then that incident with the suit yesterday, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't sit still. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. I'm really happy. It's a shame I couldn't go to the screening, but I never expected you to come. Yes, the screening ticket was a gift from my dad. His heartfelt words were written on the letter. That kept me going up until today.
Even so, I won't let them off easily. I'll have a lawyer involved and make sure they pay proper alimony. But Karen, what do you plan to do now?
I don't know.
If you'd like, why not come to New York with me? You can do well anywhere. Seeing the wider world might bring new perspectives.
Yeah, thanks. I'll think about it.
All right, enough of the serious talk. You must be exhausted. Just rest for now.
As the car swayed, I felt the tight string of tension inside me finally start to loosen for the first time in a long while. There were so many things I wanted to talk about, but an overwhelming drowsiness washed over me. I'll just close my eyes for a bit. Once I'm refreshed, I'll have a long talk with Dad. Taking a deep breath, I fell asleep next to him. A few months later, after finishing a meeting outside, I returned to the office and reported to my boss. I'm back.
Oh, how did it go?
They accepted all the proposed design changes. I've already contacted the printer, so we can deliver everything next week.
Well done. Keep it up.
Yes, I will. In the end, I didn't go to New York. My dad's offer was tempting, but it seems that working at my original advertising agency suited me best. Fortunately, thanks to my boss, I was able to return to work quickly. Regarding my savings, the lawyer my dad hired was excellent, and I was able to secure a substantial alimony payment. As I was about to return to my desk, a colleague approached me.
Karen, the reporter from that weekly magazine wants to talk to you.
Again? Oh, well, all right. I went to the reception area where the reporter was waiting.
Thanks for seeing me.
I really don't have anything more to say.
Oh no, I came to thank you. The story about the clothing store that mistreated their daughter-in-law and got taken down by her superstar father. It sold like crazy. I got a lot of praise for it. Really, I'm so grateful.
To be honest, I didn't want to remember those days. But the reporter didn't stop talking.
Since then, the clothing store seems to have gone downhill. Your presence really kept it afloat. And it turns out Samantha had debts with a host club. Her child was taken in by her ex-husband. And let's see.
The reporter pulled out a battered notebook.
Oh, right. The Madam Judy became a recluse. Your ex-husband Joe and his father Bob are apparently working part-time jobs to pay off their debts. What do you think about that?
So, you do want to comment after all. And here I thought you came to thank me.
Just kidding. Well, if anything else comes up, I'll be in touch.
With that, the reporter left the office. At the same time, the chime signaling lunchtime rang out. To me, all of this was just trivial at this point. As I returned to my office, a few colleagues approached me with smiles. I went to a new, popular cafe for lunch with my colleagues and had a great time. I'm really glad I came back to this job. I would have never experienced this if I had stayed at that clothing store. Back then, I thought my life was ruined, but with my dad's help, everything was neatly resolved. Now, I can't help but enjoy every single day.